Salutations and welcome to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today on the podcast we continue our discussion with author, practitioner, and scholar on Islamic Studies and Quranic esotericism, Professor Saiyad Ahmad. Okay, so this is part 2 of our discussion with Professor Ahmad, who, among other accolades, has both very deep practical experience with Islamic magical techniques and deep scholarly experience. Now, Professor Ahmad holds both a PhD as well as an MA in Islamic Studies from Princeton University. He taught at the American University in Cairo for many years, and he's traveled the world learning from those engaged in Islamic esoteric practices. Now, in the last episode, we discussed a lot of really interesting things. We talked about the Islamic magical and esoteric practices, how the Quran factors into the methods of contacting and working with various spirits, and we also compared the Islamic method to what Dr. Stephen Skinner calls the Solomonic method. That was the last episode. Definitely check that out. In this episode, Professor Ahmad takes us deep into the life of Ahmad ibn Ali Al-Buni. Now, Al-Buni was a well-known Sufi and a writer on Islamic esotericism. He talked about how letters and the names of God are used in order to make talismans, and so many more important topics. Also, we talk about the hushed topic of exorcisms in the Islamic context, and Professor Ahmad shares some, well, very chilling experiences and direct involvement that he's had with those oppressed by demonic or jinnic spirits. And now, without further ado, here's part 2 of our conversation with Professor Saiyad Ahmad. Professor, thank you so much as always for taking the time, and welcome back to the Glitch Bottle podcast.
No, thank you. It's an honor, really, to be back on with you. Thank you.
We had such a great conversation last time talking about Quranic theurgy, the importance of the study of magic, and the engagement of the deep study of magical practices, operations in the Islamic world. And today, Professor, I'm very excited as well because you are here to share some information with our listeners about one of the most important and influential authors and mystics in the relation to Islamic theurgy, Quranic theurgy, and that is Ahmad Al-Buni. And yes, and you are an expert, obviously. You know, you've traveled the world. You have, literally decades of experience and researching these topics. Can you share with our listeners who might not be too familiar, Professor, about Ahmad Al-Buni? Can you give us kind of a brief overview about his life and who is Ahmad Al-Buni?
Yes, well, Alex, you have been very kind. You have spoken exaggerated fashion about me. I think I would not characterize myself as an expert. I think it's highly presumptuous for anyone alive today to claim to be an expert on Al-Buni. Al-Buni really is one of the incomparable masters of the art, the science of Quranic theurgy, and of the, what I call, occult technology of talisman making. So yes, I have done some research on the subject in manuscript libraries and so forth. I would be very reluctant to characterize myself as an expert. On the basis of the extant biographical literature. Now, mind you, the biographical literature in the Islamic intellectual tradition is quite vast. There are biographical dictionaries devoted to almost every kind of person you can imagine, from grammarians all the way to idiots, believe it or not. There were even tabaqat, what they call tabaqat works that were devoted to all sorts. It sort of became even a kind of literary exercise at a certain point. But anyhow, on the basis of these biographical dictionaries, we find out certain basic facts about Al-Buni. Now, given the fact that he is so important, it's somewhat perplexing that we don't have a lot of details about him. But what I can tell you is that his full form name is Abu al-Abbas Ahmad ibn Yusuf al-Qurashi al-Buni. So Abu al-Abbas means father of Abbas. It's called a kunya. In traditional Islamic names, that's how usually the names would begin. They would have a kunya for a male person. And so his actual given name that perhaps his friends and people who would be very close to him, like his parents or so forth, may have addressed him as Ahmad. That would be his given name. Ibn Yusuf, that would be his name of his father. And then Al-Qurashi is a nisbah. What's called a nisbah. It indicates some sort of origin. Sometimes it can be a reference to a city or place, or even a particular affiliation, a particular confessional affiliation even. But in this case, Al-Qurashi indicates that he is of Qurashite descent, which would mean that, and it doesn't specify which actual tribe. I really don't know, so it indicates he comes from the Quraysh, which of course was not a tribe. A lot of people think it was a tribe, but it was a tribal confederation to which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam also belongs. But there were various tribes. So we don't know if he's from, Banu Umayyah or Banu Taym or Banu Adi. We have no idea. Banu meaning the tribe. Banu what? Banu X. So we don't know which tribe, but it indicates Al-Qurashi. And then Al-Buni is a reference to a town in Algeria, which would have been modern-day Algeria. What is now modern-day Algeria, which at the time would have been called Al-Buna. And from that you would get the nisbah Al-Buni. But this place doesn't exist now. So apparently there is a present-day town in northeastern coastal Algeria called Annaba. So if you typed in Annaba, I think it probably would be maybe spelled A-N-N-A-B-A or maybe B-A-H. I'm not sure. I've never actually done it. But perhaps you could type that into a search engine, a Google search engine, and maybe find it on a map. But Annaba is where he was born. We really don't know much about what he did in North Africa, in Algeria, or so-called North Africa proper. Kind of the dividing line of North Africa is sort of Libya. And I don't know why typically Egypt, although it is strictly speaking in Northern Africa, is not considered North Africa. And Egypt is important because that's where he flourished. That's where we find, him being active. And it was there that he died, in Cairo, most likely in 622 of the Hijrah, which would correspond to 1225 of the Common Era. The reason I say most likely is we're simply not sure. Typically, the biographical dictionaries will say that he died in 1225. But there is some indication, because if you actually start researching manuscripts, and if you're really interested in the works of Al-Buni, you've really got to go to manuscripts. There are some published versions of some of his books, and we will get into that in due course. I just want to focus on his basic facts of his life first. There are some of his books which have been published, but they're not really accurate editions. There is a huge corpus of writings ascribed to Al-Buni that remains in manuscript. And the term corpus Bunianum, in analogy with the Corpus Hermeticum, was coined by the contemporary Dutch scholar Jan Just Witkam. He came up with this handy turn of phrase. So there's a huge body of writings that's ascribed to Al-Buni, which continues to remain in manuscript. What relation exactly these writings bear to Al-Buni, whether he actually wrote them or they're mere attributions or works which have later been appropriated his name, is very hard to say and is a very complex question. But if you start looking into some of these manuscripts, you will find that he seems to be flourishing very near this death date. I don't remember the exact date now. Maybe 620, 621, something like this. I don't have the manuscripts in front of me. But there is a marginal note in a particular manuscript that indicates that it was read back to him. And he's in Cairo. And the reading is taking place in Cairo. In fact, in the Qarafa, which is a cemetery, and still exists there. I don't know if you've been to Cairo. I used to live very close to this cemetery when I lived in Egypt. Close by car. I mean, it would be a pretty long walk, but it wasn't very far by car. And you would have to go by car because there's an autostrad, there's a highway sort of, it's off a highway. but it's not really clear where his tomb is now. You don't find any sign of it. There was an author named Ibn Zayyat who wrote a book called Al-Kawakib As-Sayyara fi Tartib Az-Ziyara. So it's kind of a tourist guide, so to speak, to the cemetery. He was, in the 8th or 9th century of the Hijrah. So in his time, Ibn Zayyat mentions that the tomb is there and people would go to it. But obviously by now it's either defunct or has just been swallowed up by the ever-expanding number of graves and tombs there. So that's pretty much all we know. We don't really find more of a trace in the biographical dictionaries. And if you start looking around in the different biographical dictionaries, and this happens with a lot of famous people in Islamic history, they kind of just recycle each other. Except there's just so little information to recycle, you don't find much. It's, maybe a bit surprising that he didn't leave more of a trace in these biographical compendia. But it may well be, like many Sufis, he probably just kept a low profile, and his immense renown is maybe more of a posthumous development. I don't know. And you do find this in the case of other extremely famous people, like the founder of the eponymous founder of the Shadhili Sufi Tariqa. He doesn't leave, Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili doesn't leave behind really any written works, but you have all sorts of quotations from him and prayers and all this sort of material. But it's not really until after his death that you have this explosion of writing about the Shadhili Tariqa. And so maybe you have a similar situation, kept a low profile, had a small circle of people, and it's only after his death that his writings start circulating wider and wider. So
here is this amazing man, Ahmad Al-Buni. He's an incredible Sufi writer. He expounded, he had added incredible depth to the esoteric value of letters and topics relating everything from sihr, to mathematics, to talismans and divination with the Shams al-Ma'arif, which we'll get into all that stuff. But here's this amazing mystic and esoteric teacher. And yet, as you said, there are people who might have written documents or books or writings and attributed them to Al-Buni. How can you talk a little bit about, I think Western esotericists are familiar with every grimoire, for instance, is attributed to Solomon. This is the key of Solomon. This is the testament of Solomon. Obviously, Solomon did not actually write these things, but was it a similar case where just like Solomon, Buni was so well known and so popular that writers of the day might have kind of used a pseudo, almost like a pen name to put things like that underneath? Or how did that work?
It's possible, but before I answer that, if I may just say a couple of other words, I now found the necessary document. There is indication then that Al-Buni was alive as late as the 23rd day of the lunar month of Rabi' al-Awwal in the year 622 in Cairo. So there is manuscript evidence, and that's pretty late. And he's supposed to die in the same year. Now, it's certainly possible. There are some of these biographical sources that indicate he lived until the year 630. And so there is indication, though, that he was alive on the 23rd of Rabi'ul Awwal, which is near the beginning of the year. So in the Islamic lunar calendar, you have Muharram, then you have Safar, then you have Rabi'ul Awwal. So it's like the third month of the year. So like January, February, March, something like that, right? Yeah. And we don't really know exactly which date he died on. And that is indicated in two manuscripts. However, I should have to be fair and point out that it was actually Noah Gardner who first brought this to the attention of the scholarly community in a paper which was published in an online peer-reviewed journal in January 2012. It was called Forbidden Knowledge in the Journal of Arabic and Islamic Studies. You can actually read that online. As to your question, the Corpus Bunyanum is a large body of works. And I would not be surprised. Exactly how large it is very hard to say. Again, I mentioned Noah Gardner. Noah Gardner has authored a full-length dissertation. There have been other dissertations on Al-Buni before Gardner's, and I've seen all of them. So, I've seen Edgar Francis's work, I've seen Cohen's work, I've seen book published by Dorothy Pilo. It was a dissertation, was published, it was in German. Anyway, so there are various, but I think Gardner's really is probably the best of them, and certainly the most recent, and certainly is the only research to date that has tried to look at all of the manuscripts. But we don't have a full listing of all of the manuscripts that he saw. I think he mentions something that he's seen something like 200 different manuscripts, and that's of various titles. What we can't say for sure is that Al-Buni authored some kind of a book which was known as the Sun of Knowledge, and that's known in Arabic as Shamsul Ma'arif. Now, the problem is, and it's a big problem, the extant biographical literature and bibliographical literature speaks of Al-Buni having written 3 recensions of this book. I refer to that as the 3 recensions hypothesis. I don't take it as a fact. So these Arabic sources take it as a fact, but I don't. What they mean by 3 recensions is they mention that he supposedly wrote a book called Shamsul Ma'arif As-Sughra. So that means the lesser, the shorter, the minor, if you like, Sun of Knowledge. And then the Shamsul Ma'arif Al-Kubra, the larger Sun of Knowledge. And if there's a larger and there's a smaller, then gosh, there must have been a middle. And so some people then speak of Shamsul Ma'arif Al-Wusta. And the confusion extends often to modern manuscript catalogs as well. Even people who specialize in Islamic studies, if they haven't themselves been involved in manuscript research, they don't realize this. So no catalog really can be relied upon if you are really serious about manuscript research. If you have a published catalog of, let's say, the Arabic manuscripts in the British Library, or for example, in the Garrett collection at Princeton, or the Mach catalog, so the Garrett collection the catalog is by Hitti at Princeton. I know the Princeton one very well because I went there. So the catalog of the Garrett collection is by Hitti. Then there's another catalog of the Garrett collection, which is by Mach. Sometimes they also talk about a Mach collection. Then there's another catalog by Ormsby. So you have these published catalogs. So, but if you consult Hitti or Mach or Ormsby, it'll give you a description. And nowadays, if you do that online, you'll get the same thing. But until you actually go and look at the manuscript, you can't really believe a word, or you should be very skeptical of what you read. Now, Mach and Ormsby were really, really great scholars of manuscripts, but they're not infallible. So it's not uncommon, even in a very good published catalog, to find errors. So until you've gone and looked at a book, you don't know. And you will find this to be a huge problem also if you go and do research in Istanbul. If you go to the Süleymaniye Kütüphanesi, the Süleymaniye Library, there are published catalogs, but really everything is online, but you can only consult it online on site. As far as I know, I don't think they've opened it up so you can just sit on a laptop anywhere and go through the internet. But you will find some catalog entries are very complete, and other ones are very sparse. But what you will find then is that because a cataloger will sit down, he'll have a stack of manuscripts, and he's got to go through them and write something up for each one. So what does he do? Oh, he sees the name of Al-Buni. So then he goes to the biographical literature, and he goes to the bibliographical literature. He says, oh, okay, so Al-Buni had some book called Shams al-Ma'arif al-Kubra, and one called Al-Wusta, and one called Al-Sughra, and this looks like a smaller one, so this must be the Sughra. Or it may even say that, and if it doesn't say that, he'll conclude and he'll write that in the catalog. And then he'll give a reference, and he'll say, he'll mention Kashf al-Dhunun, which is a very famous bibliographical source. Kashf al-Dhunun an Asami al-Kutub wal-Funun by the famous Katib Chalabi, right? And that'll be the end of it, right? Until someone comes and actually looks. So as a researcher, you have to be very skeptical. So when we first started out doing this research, actually what happened was, this is an interesting little story, the so-called Egyptian revolution took place, and I was actually out of the country when it just sort of started, but I was back in the country on the day that it happened. I was back on January 25th. The plane landed, and we weren't even sure it was going to land. They said a revolution has taken place in the country, and so on and so forth. So then we went home, and then, of course, whatever happened, and then we all fled the country, my family and I, after a week back. Actually, what happened was that there was an evacuation that took place. To make a long story short, we ended up in Istanbul. And I had a student at the time who had approached me, and he wanted to work on Al-Buni at AUC. I was teaching at the American University of Cairo at the time. And his name is John D. Martin III. So John had approached me actually much before, the year before the so-called revolution happened, and he had started working. And I didn't know where John was either. And so when I reached Istanbul, I emailed him. And I wasn't sure if he hadn't even gotten out of Cairo because, Hosni Mubarak, who was the president at the time, he was refusing to step down, had actually shut down the internet. So I wasn't even sure he would get the message. I was surprised he immediately emailed me back because I saw it on my smartphone. And I found out that he was also in Istanbul, and his hotel was just down the street. So then I said, all right, whatever's happening in Egypt is happening in Egypt, but here we are. This is even better than we could imagine because you wanted to do research on Al-Buni, and I told you had to go to Istanbul. Well, here we are. Let's get started. So I said, all right, I'll walk you through it. I'll show you how you actually do it. He hadn't done manuscript research before. And so then the two of us actually went and we spent about a week. And then he had to leave. He went somewhere else after that. And I stayed on for another couple of weeks, I think it was, until Mubarak stepped down and I made my way back to Egypt. But so we were able to get a fair amount of research done there. And this is what we found out. We found out there are a lot of problems in these catalogs, and he collected a lot of information and went on and wrote a thesis, which very quickly then after he wrote it became somewhat obsolete. It was a strange time. A lot of people were working on Al-Buni. So Gardner was working on Buni. There was a fellow in France named Coulon who was working on Al-Buni. And so all of these guys were sort of working at the same time. And some of them had more manuscripts than others. And anyhow, so initially John convinced me that there may actually have been a wusta, a kind of medium, shall we say, medium length recension of the Sun of Knowledge. Later, I concluded that there was no such thing, and that actually what happened was that there was a maybe short original recension of the Sun of Knowledge, or the Shams al-Ma'arif, and then that there must have been a expanded version, which came to be known as Shams al-Ma'arif al-Kubra, or the longer version. I should point out, I examined something like 15 manuscripts in various collections, in various libraries in Istanbul, or what would have been in various libraries in Istanbul, and have all now been consolidated into the one library of the Sulaimaniya Mosque. There were different libraries, but they're no longer separate like there was. There's the famous Hagia Sophia Mosque, right? Hagia Sophia had its own library, but it's no longer in the Hagia Sophia. So Hagia Sophia collection is now in Sulaimaniya, for example. I saw 15 different manuscripts, and 14 of those were in different Istanbul libraries, which are all now in the Sulaimaniya, and one which I came across in Oxford in 2012 at the Bodleian. I should say that out of all of these manuscripts which I have seen, none of them has Shams al-Ma'arif, or the Sun of Knowledge, with any further appellation afterwards, whether Al-Kubra, the larger, or As-Sughra, the shorter or the lesser, and Al-Wusta, the medium. By the way, I don't think I mentioned, the person who really sort of first gives us this problem of these three recensions was an Egyptian Sufi scholar named Abdul Rauf Ali Al-Munawi. Now he died in the year 1031 of the Hijrah, if I'm not mistaken, which is should be about 1621.
If you're someone listening to the podcast, you have a fair collection of esoteric books in the Western tradition. Yeah. But if you really want to find out about Al-Buni, if you want to look at or have a copy of the Shams al-Ma'arif, or these amazing texts that are attributed to Al-Buni, is there any any points in the right direction you might have? Any advice to people who really want to research more or check out Al-Buni and Islamic theurgy?
To check out Al-Buni, you have no choice. You have to learn Arabic.
So you have to know Arabic. So
you have Arabic. There's no way around it. And this might be too much detail for people, but unfortunately, this is for many people, but this is the nature of the subject. So as I said, you have this so-called three recensions, what I call the three recensions hypothesis. And I told you that there was no sort of medium length version of the Shams. And I concluded that because out of all of the manuscripts I looked at, it just didn't match up that way. It was clear that there was a short version and that there was a longer version. And what people tend to think is the wusta, or the medium version of the Shams al-Ma'arif, actually is another book. So manuscripts which I did find that were supposedly the medium version, or considered to be a medium version by scholars, were often mislabeled as Shams al-Ma'arif al-Wusta, or the medium version. And in fact, those texts are of another text which he wrote called Lata'if al-Isharat. And that I concluded on the basis of a manuscript I saw in the Bodleian. So what's going on? So you had this other text which was misidentified because it has maybe a similar style to be, another recension of the Shams, but it's not. So what I think happened was that you had a sort of brief, maybe original version by Al-Buni, and then you had a more expansive, longer version. Now the question arises, well, is this expanded, larger version also by Al-Buni? Or is it the creation of later hands? Was it people who expanded it later? Or was it something invented by later day publishers, which is a view which seems to be espoused by Noah Gardner in the paper that he wrote, which was in the Journal of Islamic Studies Online. I am of the opinion, at the current state of research, we cannot decisively answer that question. But I will say that Al-Buni and his works continue to be a living tradition in the Islamic world. Now, that's not something that the Western researcher is necessarily going to be interested in, and even if they are, it's almost impossible to gain access. Because what we are talking about is a very select circle of people who are actual practitioners, people who actually make talismans, people who actually are involved in the inner contemplative disciplines of tasawwuf or Sufism or irfan, Islamic gnosis, and who also may be involved in making talismans, in helping people. They may be performing exorcisms, and they're doing all sorts of things. And that's not something you just sort of walk in to off the street. And I think it's very important for Western practitioners, people who are involved in Western esotericism, to understand this, because I have found in my research and in my travels around the world that Western esoterists are fascinated by something called the Picatrix. Now, the Picatrix is actually a peculiar title. I think I'm not exactly sure about the whole history, but it's some sort of mangled version of the name of Hippocrates, probably in Arabic. But the work has nothing to do, the actual title in Arabic, and the original is in Arabic, is Ghayatul Hakim, which means the goal of the sage. Yes, so the book is in Arabic, but the odd thing is that nobody who is involved in Islamic esoteric disciplines today in the Islamic world uses this book that I know of. And mind you, the Picatrix, they say, is by someone named Al-Majriti. We don't know exactly who this person is and which Al-Majriti, and there's a lot of research, because there's more than one person possibly with that name who is the author. So we have to say it's a work of uncertain authorship. But we don't have that situation with Al-Buni. And the people who are involved in these things all swear by Al-Buni. And there's no use, in other words, they do not employ, they do not use the things which are there in the Picatrix. That's important to keep in mind. So this is still a living tradition, but it's not open to the world in that anybody can just come and find out about it. So this is important to know, because the people who are involved in this work, they still use the larger version, the so-called Shams al-Ma'arif al-Kubra. Noah Gardner tried to chip away at this hypothesis, or chip away at this, or challenge this, I should say, not chip away. You try to challenge this idea and espouse the theory that a lot of the talismanic diagrams which are found in the longer work, the Shams al-Ma'arif al-Kubra, were actually lifted from another book by publishers, presumably, who wanted to popularize this book. And the Shams al-Ma'arif al-Kubra was actually published in lithograph. And it was also published in type, movable type as well. And there are different editions, but you find a wealth of very interesting talismanic diagrams in them. So Gardner advanced the theory that these talismanic diagrams were actually taken from another book on talismans by someone named Al-Bistami. And he concludes this simply on the superficial similarity of the diagrams. And you really can't say that. You can't just sort of eyeball one of these pictures and say, well, this one looks like that one, because they have a similar shape, that they're the same thing. Because there are some sort of geometric drawings here, and I wish I could, maybe show you images, but I'll just make the point that there's some sort of geometric elements, shall we say, and there's some writing, and then there will be so-called magic squares. So they superficially look similar, but they're not. And in fact, in different manuscripts of the Shams al-Ma'arif al-Kubra, as for better or worse is what it's called, they actually look slightly different. And if you look in the relevant work of Al-Bistami, they seem to be similar, but if you actually look at them and look at the mathematics, they don't have the same magic squares at all. So they can't be the same. Now, I argued for all of this in a paper which I presented at the Islamic Manuscripts Association in July of 2012, and then I presented a similar kind of findings in Beirut in December 2013, and there was a somewhat similar lecture given at the Warburg Institute in between those two. But anyway, these things fell on deaf ears, and it is what it is. To conclude then, I think there was a shorter version, which Al-Buni definitely wrote, and then there's a longer version. There may be extrapolations in the longer version. There may be things which people wrote in their own personal copies, which over time, through different copyists, then became incorporated into the text, unknowingly by different copyists. But the point, Alex, is that if you are a real practitioner of this stuff, you don't just go on the manuscript. It's still a living tradition, and the people who are involved in it actually know what they're doing. I had the good fortune of studying the Shams al-Ma'arif with somebody who actually knew it. So people can take that or they can leave it. So that's what I think. There are, despite what I said about the Picatrix, there are still striking similarities. I think this came out in our earlier interview as well, between what Skinner calls Solomonic magic, and as he defines magic, I don't have an objection to that phrase, and also the so-called Hellenic magic, although I haven't seen the relevant volume by Professor Skinner on that topic. So there are tremendous similarities in terms of a circle of protection, in terms of various other procedures, which is really surprising. But those are, I should emphasize that those are formal similarities, not material similarities. And I use formal and material in the scholastic sense. That is to say that they are similar in form, but the actual substance, the actual things that a person would be doing in an Islamic kind of esoteric ritual, obviously would involve the divine names in Arabic. It would involve quotations from the Quran, in what I call Quranic theurgy. And this would naturally then be different from what an ancient Egyptian practitioner of so-called Solomonic magic would be doing, or what a Hellenic practitioner would have been doing. Is that correct for me to say ancient Egyptian?
Someone living in Alexandria in the year, 100 BC to approximately, 200 AD.
In form, there are tremendous similarities. Ritual purity. I mean, we talked about this in the first interview in some detail.
For those who are deeply familiar with Skinner's work, they're very familiar with the Western grimoires and things like a circle of protection, the divine names, which in the Western context is a mix between Hebrew and Greek and certain other names, right. Wearing a phylactery for protection, pre-consecrating materials. So you're saying all of these things can be found on the formal level or in form, but it's very different when it comes to the Islamic theurgistic context.
Yes. On the basis of what I read in Stephen Skinner's book, I would say that formally there are striking similarities.
What is basically in the Shams al-Ma'arif? Is this detailing how to summon, aerial and infernal or angelic spirits? Is it involving talismans? What are the contents of this book?
The Shams al-Ma'arif wa Lataif al-Awarif, and you're very correct in giving the full form of the title, is a very complex work. In its complexity and scope, I would say that it is most similar in the Western tradition, not to the Picatrix, which I've already said, but to something like the 3 books or 4 books of...
Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy.
Occult philosophy, thank you. So it's something like the 3, and there's another book, so it's the 4th book, but the 3 books of occult philosophy of Agrippa, yeah. It's something like this. But he deals with sort of a full range of esoterica and arcana, but he begins by putting forward a very basic cosmology. And you will find that in both the shorter and the longer recensions. And so he introduces a cosmology naturally based on the geocentric system, which was really the system which was espoused throughout much of human history until modern times. And I don't want anyone to misunderstand. No, I am not saying I believe in the geocentric version in the geocentric view, but this is a symbolic cosmology. So he is espousing a geocentric cosmology. And what makes his geocentric cosmology different from, let's say, what you would find in the ancient Greeks, for example, is that he incorporates the Arabic letters into his system. And this is very important. And there are remarkable similarities, in my view, between Al-Buni's cosmology, especially this notion of introducing the Arabic letters, and the cosmology of Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi. And I should point out that I've done a fair amount of research on Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi as well. Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi is the foremost Sufi in the whole history of Sufism, without a doubt. I think it'd be very hard, even by people who don't like Ibn al-Arabi, to challenge that view. Because, whether you like Ibn al-Arabi or not, he's really, really decisive for the history of Sufism. And of course, he is also associated with a particular doctrine of the divine names. And he spells that out in a very summary form in his book, The Bezels of Wisdom. It's a short book in manuscript. It's about, 78 folios in the manuscript, most important manuscript, which he dictated, which is still extant and which I critically edited. My critical edition is about 600 pages. But if you took out the whole apparatus criticus, in modern Arabic type, normal size book, it's like 90 pages or so. All right. And he spelled out in great detail his cosmology in his much, much larger book, Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, 4 very large volumes, which would be probably about 3,000 pages. And there's different modern editions, but they're all about, thousands of pages long. And I used to always wonder about how similar these guys are in terms of their understanding of the divine names. So both of them see the divine names as a kind of theophany. You see, so that the whole world is the theophany of the divine names. So everything is a divine name. Everything is in a way, some way or another, a reflection of the divine names. And I was really amazed to learn that they both had a teacher in common in Tunisia, modern-day Tunisia. His name is Abdulaziz Al-Mahdawi. And Gardner also points this out in his publication. And it's also in his thesis that they studied with this same man. And Abdulaziz al-Mahdawi was known for teaching about these divine names. The massive book by Ibn Arabi, Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the 4,000 page book, which you can translate maybe as the Meccan openings, or the Meccan, some people would even call it the Meccan revelations, although that's not a really good translation in an Islamic context, but people have used that. The Meccan openings, the Meccan inspirations. If you look at that book also in manuscript, there's an autographed manuscript of that, and that is the ultimate recension. And that ultimate recension, that autographed manuscript, is dedicated to Abdulaziz al-Mahdawi. So they both have this they both give this central importance to the Arabic letters. what he actually says is that Ibn Arabi and Buni both have this idea that there's this cosmology. You have, God is completely sort of utterly beyond, and the absolute extent of our experience is the outermost sphere of our experience is the sphere of the fixed stars, al-kawakib al-thabita. And, fixed stars are very important in real astrology. So from the fixed stars, then you would have the sphere of Saturn, then Jupiter, and all the way down through the traditional order of the planets. I think that's called the Chaldean order, is it, in Western esotericism?
Yes, exactly. Yep, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and then you go to the Sun, of course, and then down to Venus and Mercury, and then the Moon.
Right.
Yes.
And then in the sublunary sphere, you have 4 sublunary spheres.
Yes.
Then you have fire, of each of the 4 elements in succession. So fire, air, water, and earth, although Ibn Arabi puts water somewhere else. He has his particular view on water. So the whole universe then is seen as a kind of theophany of the divine names. The Arabic letters play a role. Since the divine names are made up of the Arabic letters, that's how they play a role. Each of the Arabic letters is associated with one of the mansions of the moon, and there are 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet. And in the system of Islamic astronomy and astrology, the celestial longitude of 360 degrees is divided into 28 mansions. And it's not a neat division, which is why I think the Indians who practice Jyotish prefer 27 mansions as opposed to 28. Of course, they also use the sidereal zodiac and not the equatorial zodiac, but that's another matter. So these Arabic letters then are also central to this cosmology. And in the view of Ibn Arabi, what actually happens is that God actually breathes these letters, so to speak. So there's this notion of a divine breath as well. And that animates the whole sort of universe. And so in that way, there's some similarities with ancient Taoism as well, I think. But anyhow, so this is the cosmology which animates the whole system of Al-Buni, and that's what he commences the book with. The Shams, in both the lesser, in the shorter and the longer versions. And then what he does is he introduces the importance of these 4 elements. All right, and then he immediately brings home to the reader the importance of the letters of the Arabic alphabet. So 4 elements. The number 4 corresponds in the Arabic system of correspondences, or for want of a better term, gematria. So in Arabic, you have a system of one-to-one correspondence between the letters of the Arabic alphabet and the numbers, similar to what you have in Hebrew. But in Hebrew, you only have 22 letters, and then you add these final letters, and you come up with more values. But in Arabic, you have 28. So you follow the same order. The traditional order of Arabic now is alif, ba, ta, tha, jim. But for the gematria, they follow the ancient order, which is abjad, hawaz, hutti, kaliman, sa'afas, qirshat, thakhaz, dalagh. And there's actually 2 versions. There's the Eastern and the Western version. And in the Western version, there's a slight difference in the last few letters. By Western, I mean what you find in North Africa and Spain, or what you would have found in Islamic Spain. And that's very important to remember, because Ibn al-Arabi, if you read Ibn al-Arabi, that's what the system he uses. Paradoxically, you don't find Al-Buni using that, although you would think he would, because he's originally a Maghribi. He's from the Arab Maghrib, he's from North Africa. But he doesn't. He uses the Eastern system. So Alif is 1, Ba is 2, Jim is 3, Dal is 4, and you keep on going until you hit 10, and you hit 10 at the letter Ya. From that onwards, you count by tens. So you'd have Kaf, Lam, Mim, Nun, 20, 30, 40, 50.
That's very interesting, really quick, Professor, because I believe in the Hebrew system, Yod, or the letter Y, is also 10. I believe that's the value.
It is because for Hebrew it would be Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, right? So that's Abjad. Abjad, then Hawa, so you would have a Hey, right? And then you'd have a Vav, and then the letter Zay, Havas. Then you would have the Het, then you would have the Tav.
Yes.
Yeah. Then you would have Yud, and then you would have the Hebrew Kaf, and then the Lamed, and then the Mem, and then the Hebrew Nun. It goes the same but there's more letters in Arabic.
Yes, and the number 28 divides perfectly by 4, and you have the number 7 and 4. I mean, very occult numbers.
Exactly. So in Arabic, it goes all the way up to 1,000. And in the Eastern system, the letter for 1,000 is the ghain. So it's an ayn with a dot, a gha, like a gargling sound. Mm-hmm. And Al-Buni then says that, look, these 4 elements are really important, and indeed, 28 divides by 4, you get 7, and the number 4 is very important, and so the number 4 corresponds to the letter Dal. So then he has this meditation on the letter Dal, and he says Dal is really important because it signifies these 4 elements, but moreover, it also occurs in the name Muhammad, which is the name of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that name also consists of 4 letters, Mim, Ha, Mim, and Dal. If you do the abjad, we don't really say gematria, but if you do the abjad, if you take the total, so Mim for the name Muhammad, Mim is 40, Ha is 8, Mim is 40, Dal is 4, you get 92. And so then he proceeds to explain how to construct a magic square 4 by 4, again because of the 4 elements, based on 92, and how you should inscribe it when the moon is in its exaltation degree, and you can make a certain talisman based on that. Immediately sort of gives you that importance. And he also then tells you each magic square, and again, I don't like this term, I said in the interview, I prefer, the word in Arabic is wifq, which means a kind of harmonia or a kind of balance or accord, numerically speaking. So he also talks about how each planet has a particular magic square that it corresponds to. And then he proceeds to talk about the letter Alif. So he talks about the letter Alif and how important Alif is. Now in Arabic, you have Alif is the first letter. It's just like in Hebrew, the first letter is Aleph, in Syriac it's Alaf, and so forth. In these Semitic languages, in Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, it's all the same. The first letter is always Aleph. For some reason, they don't do that in classical Ethiopic. They have a different way of writing, and certainly you didn't have that in Akkadian because they had a different writing system, the cuneiform system, right? But in Arabic, the letter Aleph corresponds to 1 in the abjad or the gematria. But there's another way of doing the gematria or the abjad, which is to spell out the name of the letter. So Alif or Alifun will be spelled Alif, Lam, Fa. So if you take that expanded value, in that word it's 3 letters, so Alif is 1, Lam is 30, and then Fa is 80. And so what does it add up to? It adds up to 111. Okay, and so it's 111. So 111, then he talks about the importance of this. And it turns out, he doesn't really spell it out, then he makes a diagram based on Alif, and he puts a square in the middle. The word Alif has 3 letters. So he puts it into a 3 by 3. Not hard to do, and it'll work because 111, if you add up the digits, you get 3, and 3 is divisible by 3, so it is possible to inscribe it into a 3 by 3, so that it adds up to 111 in all directions. But then he says that Alif is the same as the Arabic word qutb. Qutb means axis. So Qaf is 100, Ta is 9, and Ba is 2. That also adds to 111. So he plays these kind of games, if you will, and he makes these kind of revelations, if you like, of hidden knowledge. And then he does it for Jim, and then he sort of stops and sort of leaves it to the reader to work it out, the rest of it out, presumably. And he talks then about various divine names in the rest of the book. He talks about various magic squares that are associated with different divine names. You will find, though, that a lot of times the squares that are made, and this is true in the manuscripts and in the published editions as well, they don't correspond to the divine names in question, because there are intentional errors in these manuscripts. They're there on purpose. And frankly, in some manuscripts, they're actual honest mistakes from copyists, but there are far too many in the manuscripts. So I'm sure that there are intentional mistakes there so that this knowledge can remain hidden. Now, mind you, that's just the way it's always been with these sciences. Right. They're not to be shared with all and sundry. I believe it is a biblical image. It's very, very severe image, but it's suitable here. And one does not cast pearls before swine.
Ah, yes.
Isn't that a biblical image, I think?
Yes. One doesn't cast pearls before swine. One doesn't take the precious, knowledge or wisdom and merely just, expose it for the swine to trod upon with their hooves.
Right. So by this, similarly in the Islamic world, one didn't just share this knowledge with all and sundry. We don't use the swine phrase, but one doesn't share this knowledge with all and sundry. But in the Islamic civilization, in that context, anybody who was truly qualified to learn this knowledge, it would not have been withheld from them, and that remains to be the case to this day. So there are these kind of built-in things to keep people from figuring out. Now, there is another book which Al-Buni wrote, which has never been published, and it's called Alam al-Huda. Now, unfortunately, Gardiner refers to it as Ilm al-Huda. It's the same thing. He just gets the diacritic wrong. The title is actually Alam al-Huda, which means the standard or the flag. By standard, I mean a flag. Alam means flag, the flag of guidance, and he understood it as Ilm al-Huda, the knowledge of guidance. And in this book, which remains in manuscript, Al-Buni deals with the divine names. And he goes in great detail describing various theurgic practices that can be done with each divine name, but there are no pictures in this book. There are no talismanic diagrams. That doesn't mean you couldn't construct them. Right. So it's clear to me, as someone who has been privy to some of the actual practices of this living tradition, that if you read this book, you can figure out what to do. But he's not going to explain it all for you. You see, he said some things, he's left out other things. So this book, the Shams writings, the body of text, which is known as the Shams, the longer and the shorter recension, this is extremely important. Alam al-Huda is an extremely important book. There are some other works which he authored. I mentioned someone named Dorothy Pilo, who did a dissertation in German. Some treatises by Al-Buni, which I think are really important, and I do think that he wrote them. And, people can agree with me or disagree with them. They're free to do so. I'm sure that he wrote these works. And they are usually published collectively in the form of, under the general title, of Manba'ul Usul wal Hikmah. Manba' in Arabic means a kind of source or wellspring. So Manba'ul Usul wal Hikmah means something like the wellspring of esoteric principles and wisdom. And there's a very short treatise in there called Bughyatul Mushtaq, which is actually about the mathematics of magic squares. It's very short, and it's written out in words. There are no equations. But if you know mathematics and you read through that, you can see that he had a very good understanding in terms of algebraically of what goes into the mathematics of these squares. And there's some other treatises, but the two sort of concluding treatises, which are really long, are very interesting. One of them is a very detailed commentary on an extremely, extremely powerful prayer, which my colleague Wahid Azal refers to as the Barhatiya conjuration.
Yes, we were talking with Wahid about this, and I believe on his YouTube channel he also has himself reciting it in English, but with the actual names of power, so to speak, in there. Yeah, I see. Well, the Barhatiya oath or Barhatiya conjuration or Barhatiya oath, whatever you want to call it, is an extremely powerful recitation, very powerful text. It's very much like a mantra, you see, I would say. It's not really in Arabic. It consists of 28, again, interesting, isn't it? 28. There's a term for it in Western works and scholarly works. They call them nomina barbara. It's a Latinism, right? Yeah. Which means barbaric names, by which they mean that it's not in the known tongue. The barbarians are always the people who speak the language which you don't know, right? Right.
So that's the etymology of it, for where the Greeks got it. So these are non-Arabic terms. We could refer to them as nomina barbara if you like. And some of them may be Hebrew. I don't know. It's hard to say. They sound in some cases. Yeah, I can't really say more on that. I can tell you that the different published versions that I've seen that are out there, they don't really tell you how the words are actually pronounced.
Right.
That's something which is secret. You have to learn it from someone. There's a correct way of doing it. But Al-Buni has a whole commentary on those. Now, in that body of text called Manba al-Usul wal-Hikmah. And it's very interesting because he gives detailed procedures, different magic squares, all sorts of other talismans and other workings that can be done with those. So that's one. And then the other text is a commentary on another oath or conjuration or whatever you want to call it, which is called the Jaljalutiyya. Now, both of these, the Barhatiyya and the Jaljalutiyya, are said to have been transmitted by Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam. The Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, commander of the faithful.
Yes, and for the listeners out there, this is there was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and then after that there were 4 righteous caliphs, or the Rashidun, and Ali was not only a family member of the Prophet, but also the 4th caliph, correct?
Well, that is the Sunni view.
That is the Sunni view. Yes, I should be very specific. That is the Sunni view.
Ali, the Shia Muslims consider Imam Ali to be the sole spiritual and temporal successor of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, without anybody in between. And so they don't really recognize the caliphates of Abu Bakr, Umar, and then Umar ibn Khattab, and then Uthman ibn Affan to have been legitimate caliphates, and in fact consider them to have been usurpers. That's just the Shia belief. And Imam Ali is the first Shiite Imam, and for the 12ers, then there are 11 more. So there's Hassan, his eldest son, then Hussein, his younger son, the younger brother of Hassan, and then the next 9 are through the Hussainid line up until the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, who is the Imam in occultation, and the Shia Muslims are awaiting his return, and the Sunni Muslims also have a belief in the Mahdi figure. And, when he comes, we'll settle this question. Who's right, I suppose. But the point is that all Sunni Muslims who are Sufis, the Sunni Sufi Muslims, and the Shia, Muslims, they all have the same view that Imam Ali received received the totality of the esoteric patrimony of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of these sort of esoteric hidden doctrines were taught to him. So it's not surprising then that there should be these texts that are floating around, would be the claim, you see. And so both the Jaljalutiyya and the Barhatiyya then are said to go back to Imam Ali, and Al-Buni upholds this as well. And so the Jaljalutiyya also consists of a whole range of these very peculiar non-Arabic names. Now the difference is, the standard version of the Barhatiyya just consists of this list of 28 names.
Yes.
There are versifications that have been done afterwards to maybe facilitate memorization. So versification in Arabic poetic form. But the Jaljalutiyya in every version that I've seen is always versified. The names are not set off by themselves. The traditional way of reciting the Barhatiyya is just to do the names. But the Jaljalutiyya is recited in verse. There are some variations in the verses. And what I have found, I have different versions of this. Some in manuscript and some in published form. And usually the ones in published form also do not circulate openly. You can't just walk into a shop and buy them. And there might be someone who's selling them, but he sells them under the table, so to speak. And he'll only sell them to you if he has received permission from, the head of the order or whatever to have this sold to you. Believe it or not, this is still in some places in the Muslim world where this is going on. And so you can imagine my surprise when about a week ago I was walking around here and I went to a bookshop, a used bookshop. It's a national chain now called Half Price Books. And I found this book with this beautiful red cover called Anwar al-Haqa'iq al-Nuriyya. And you open up the book, and it's a published book, and there are in all these prayers in Arabic with instructions in Ottoman Turkish. And what do you have at the very end? The Jaljalutiyya. I just couldn't believe it. So somebody, for whatever reason, decided to sell, some used books. Maybe they inherited them from somewhere, I don't know. And here's this thing, And so So I found this version of the Jaljalutiyya. I had other versions. And if you look in these different versions of the Jaljalutiyya, typically what people do is they'll insert a couple of verses somewhere on their own which matches the rhyme and the meter to ask for blessings on their particular Sufi sheikh or their particular Sufi order. And that's what happened in this version, for example, which I found in a used bookstore here, surprisingly. Right? So the Jaljalutiyya, the Birhitiyya, these were considered extremely important by Al-Buni, and I can tell you that they are considered to be extremely important in Islamic esoteric circles, and you will find them recited all over the Muslim world, but not widely acknowledged or talked about for obvious reasons. So, if you're fortunate enough, if somebody else who knew Arabic walked into the bookstore and bought that book, I suppose they could go home and recite it. But you're sort of doing that at your own risk.
Yeah, you're kind of playing with fire. In fact, I think this might be a good time to kind of let the listeners know who aren't too familiar with it. At least the one that Wahid Azal was reciting with the Birhatiya conjuration oath. As you said, before the names, there's all this other text, and it's an English translation, but it talks about, basically invoking these angelic beings, oh, angels of the highest elevation and of the great primordial Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're basically asking these very powerful angels to fulfill this oath. Can you just tell our listeners, what is the purpose of both of these oaths? Is it angelic invocation? Is it sublunar spiritual evocation? What is the overall purpose of these oaths?
It depends, because there are different oaths.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be recited with or without these oaths. There is a huge range, I should say, of practice with each of these. But typically, when you have a so-called oath or a qasam involved, it's for a particular purpose. And you may be pressing into service, for want of a better term, these kind of angelic entities. If you are spiritually stronger, then they will not be sublunar, because the more powerful spiritual forces or energies, for want of a better term, are superlunar as opposed to sublunar. And because they are superlunary as opposed to sublunary, they require more energy, more commitment, more, for want of a better term, spiritual strength to bring them into play, if so to speak. So that's what I could say about that. I don't know if I can go into more detail on that.
The names themselves, obviously, are the cornerstone. They don't change, but the oaths that surround the names, it's kind of like a kaleidoscope of different possible purposes. So if you are looking to have angelic assistance, you would have an oath that is structured specifically for invoking certain angelic beings, and then you would follow with the names, or...
Yes, that would be one way of going about it. But if you actually read in the commentary by Al-Buni, you can actually do selected names in a specific way for specific things. and he goes in great detail. You see, he'll comment on each little bit. He can say, well, if you do these three names, inscribe a particular talisman on a particular day during a particular planetary configuration, and if you write it out using these kind of inks, with saffron or I don't know what, and carry this with you, then you will have, worldly success, for example. Sort of made that up at random, but these are the kinds of things he talks about. Very specific uses of particular names within the Birhitiyya conjuration or within the Jaljalutiyya. And I should say that there is this doctrine among some of the Sufis. I want to be a bit cautious when I say that, so I didn't say all. I found this particularly among Sufis who are involved with the Shadhili tariqah or other tariqahs that crisscrossed with the Shadhiliyya, with the Shadhili tariqah, because some Sufi tariqas also, they sort of merge. It's like different streams flowing into one another. So some Sufi tariqas may have branched out or also taken one of the people in a particular Sufi tariqa may also have had a Shadhili initiation, for example. So I find that in the Shadhili, the broader Shadhili tradition, so to speak, you find this discussion of non-Arabic terms in different prayers and orisons which are transmitted in these Sufi tariqas. And they typically gloss them by saying that they are in al-lughatu Suryaniyya. Now, people who read that often misunderstand that. So in modern Arabic, you would say al-lughat al-Suryaniya, and in fact in modern Arabic, yes, if you want to speak of the Syriac language, which is used by the Syriac, Nestorians and Jacobites and so, they still survive. The Mar Thoma Christians of South India is also, their liturgical language is Syriac, which sort of basically is a Christian version of Aramaic, but this is not Syriac. It was a term which was used, and anyone who knows Syriac can look at this and say, well, this is not in Syriac, even though there might be some phrases that sound like they are from Hebrew. So in fact, there are some phrases, especially in the Burhitiyat, that actually sound like a garbled version of the phrase in the Hebrew Bible, in the Masoretic text of the book of Exodus, where Moses encounters Allah, encounters God, Jehovah. He asks him his name, and he says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh in Hebrew. I am. So there seems to be some similarities. Some people have espoused this view. That just reminded me, there's a very interesting scholar, just new up-and-coming scholar, just finished his PhD from the Warburg Institute under the supervision of Professor Charles Burnett, a friend of mine named Michael Noble, and he has done research, interestingly enough, on Fakhruddin Ar-Razi. And Fakhruddin Ar-Razi is what 600s of the Hijra. He's known as a famous commentator on the Quran and a theologian. He has a massive 30-volume commentary on the Quran. But he apparently was also an occultist, and he has this whole occult text. And anyway, so he did his dissertation on that. But I remember Michael Noble telling me that, there seems to be these kind of phrases in some of these, and it sounds like Ehyeh, Shariyeh. And I said, yeah, I noticed that too, but I really don't know what to make of it. And he said to me, well, what do you think it is? And I remember telling him, I said, well, and then I told him that what I'm telling you about this so-called Syriac thing, but it's not really Syriac. And I remember the first person who told me this, I was quite fascinated by his whole account. It was when I was a graduate student way back at Indiana University, Bloomington. It must have been late 1989 or early 1990. It must have been 1990 because it was warm by then. Yeah, so it was the spring semester of 1990. And I was talking to one of my professors, the late Victor Danner, who had become a Muslim. His Muslim name was Abdul Jabbar, but he was very, very low profile about it. He was very interested in linguistics. And we came out of Goodbody Hall and we were walking, and this chap walked in front of us and he said, oh, you know who that was? He said hello to him. I said, no. He said, that's Carlton Hodge. I said, really? Who's he? He said, oh, he's a linguist. And they started this whole discussion about linguistics. He said, Carlton's always been interested in finding the original language of mankind. Among linguists, there is some unusual theory called the Nostratic hypothesis that claims that all human languages go back to some super proto-mother language which some of them have dubbed Nostratic. But anyhow, he said, well, actually, the original language of mankind before the flood, Professor Danner said to me, was called al-lughat al-Suryaniya. And I said, really? Well, where do you get that? So then he proceeded to tell me that there was a book called Kitab al-Ibriz, which means the Book of Pure Gold. And since then it has been translated into English by some Orientalists and published by the Dutch publishing house E.J. Brill. And he said, well, this book is by someone named Abdelaziz ad-Dabbagh, a Moroccan saint. And Abdelaziz ad-Dabbagh was actually completely illiterate, and he dictated this book, or these are actually the questions and answers, questions which were put to him by his student Abdelaziz ibn al-Mubarak. And at one point he starts asking him about these funny things in the Quran, these letters that begin at the beginning of certain, and certain other words. And he says, well, these are actually not in Arabic. These are the primordial language, Abdelaziz ad-Dabbagh tells him. And this was the language which was spoken by people before the flood, and it's called al-lughat al-Suryaniya. And this is the language of Adam and Eve. And he says further that this continues to be the language of the heavenly hosts, of the angels. And the great saints, like the Qutb, the axial saint, the great saints who are in the hierarchy of these, 313 saints, they still use this language. And it's a language of pure sound. So then Abdelaziz, his Ibn Mubarak, asked Dabbagh, well, what language of the world's languages today is closest to Suryaniya? And he says the language of the people of India. And I thought that was absolutely strange. you have to sort of understand the context. I knew about Victor Danner's background, so he didn't have to explain. But people who are listening would know Victor Danner was, for a long time, a follower of someone named Fritjof Schuon, and had corresponded with someone named, and Fritjof Schuon, of course, was Swiss, Alsatian, from Alsace-Lorraine region. And he also had a correspondence for a time with someone named René Guénon, who was a Frenchman who became a Muslim. And these people are generally known as the perennialists now. And Schuon was a very famous writer on comparative religion and so forth. So these guys had a tremendous reverence for India and for Shankaracharya and the Advaita Vedanta, the Vedantic school. And so I thought, so this is why he likes this. And I thought, I wonder where this is. And I said, where is this in the book? He said, well, you're going to have to go and find out yourself. So anyway, years later, when I knew my Arabic was good enough, I actually bought the book in Cairo and I read through it and I found the passage. And sure enough, he does say that. And it's a very strange passage. But it got me to thinking, because in a lot of these practices, we recite letters and things and they're pure sound. Well, who else does that? People who follow what I call the Vedic religion. I don't like the term Hinduism. Hinduism is something which was invented as a term by British people who were very confused by a complex religious phenomenon they encountered in India. And so the Vedic religion, it has a huge amount of range. I use that term simply to indicate that, you accept the authority of the Vedas. And so you do have, if you look into these, you have these sacred syllables. And in later schools of Indic religions, whether Vedic or non-Vedic, and by non-Vedic I mean Buddhism, because Buddhism doesn't accept the authority of the Vedas, you have something called Tantrism, the Tantra, and this is a phenomenon which you find in the Vedic religion, you find in Buddhism as well. It's maybe much later than the Buddha. Of course, they claim that it goes all the way back, and anyway, but it involves, and Tantra really means a kind of like continuum. It refers to, in Sanskrit, the warp and weft in weaving. But in Tantric religion, for want of a better term, what they are doing is they are using body, speech, and mind, as they would say, to transform themselves, to attain liberation, moksha, if you want to use the Vedic terminology, or nirvana, if you want to use the Buddhist terminology, a kind of spiritual liberation in this very body without having to reincarnate. Now, I don't believe in reincarnation. I'm a Muslim, okay? But I'm just making a similarity. And so in Tantrism, you have them reciting what are called Bij Mantra in Sanskrit. And in English, they always transliterate it with these A's on the end, although the A is actually quiescent. So they write Bija Mantra. B-I-J-A, and then the word mantra, which has almost become an English word. And Bij means seed. These are seed syllables. And again, so they'll write them, they'll transcribe, with the Sanskrit, with the Devanagari writing system, but it's pure sound. Things like Om, Shrim, Klim, Hrim, various syllables that don't mean anything. And sometimes they'll combine it, they'll put some sort of sound, and then they'll say, I don't know, Nama Ganesha or something, Nama Shivaya, the name of Ganesh or the name of Shiva. And you also find in the Islamic context, you have certain letters and sounds like Alif, Lam, Mim, Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ain, Sad, Ha, Mim, Ain, Sin, Qaf. In fact, you have 29 surahs of the Quran that are preceded by various letters, which are called the Al-Huruf Al-Muqatta'at, the separated or just disjointed letters. And if you count up all those letters, you actually get 78 of them. And if you drop the repetitions, because some of them are repeated from these 29 surahs, you end up with 14, which is exactly half of 28. So it's those mansions of the moon where the moon is growing in light. And so you have a similar sort of idea in Tantrism of the garland of letters. And I can tell you that in some practices of the Shadhli Sufi Tariqa, not only do you recite these sacred sounds, these letters, if you like, these bija mantras, but you also do stuff with your hands. And so there is a certain kind of ritual gesture, which is very similar to what you find in Tantrism, which is called mudra, or a kind of esoteric ritual gesture. So you have a similar notion where you are involving your body, your voice, so your speech, and your heart, or they say in Tantrism, they'll say mind, right? and you are doing all that as a kind of spiritual practice. And mind you, all of that also comes into play in these ruhani amaliyat ruhaniya in different languages, or what we would call these spiritual workings, or this Quranic theurgy. All of this comes into play. And I find that really interesting, because you find this, wherever these Indic religions have gone. For example, when I went to Japan, I found this kind of stuff in Shingon Buddhism as well. And that's not surprising, because Shingon is a tantric Buddhism which comes from India originally via China. And oddly enough, you find similar things, and I think Dr. Skinner has written about this, hasn't he? In Chinese mysticism, in Taoism, if I'm not mistaken. So again, the similarity in terms of form is amazing.
Western esotericists can absolutely relate, because a lot of the invocation or evocations in certain grimoires use these either barbarous names of power or some kind of just syllables, va, V-A-A, or, hi, how, aya, exa. I mean, there are certain things that echo that. And so, obviously, Professor, given the scope of this book, given the scope of the oaths, given the scope of these names and these amazing connections, can you share a little bit about people who practice this? We won't mention any names. These are secret groups. The word occult means hidden. It should absolutely stay that way. I wouldn't dare to ask you to reveal anything like that, but can you just talk about the importance of guarding this knowledge and the secrecy of it compared to, well, here's the text, we just translated it into English, and, Simon & Schuster's going to publish this, and it's going to be all over, Can you just talk about why is that so important to safeguard that? Because I think a lot of Western esotericists, many of the grimoires from the Western tradition, are available either online or in book format, but the key then is you as the practitioner actually have to have the spiritual fortitude to actually complete the rite, which a lot of people don't even get to that. So why this extra step of utter secrecy?
I will answer that question, but before we lose the thread, I just want to say one or two words again about what I was saying before. I will answer your question.
Absolutely.
Because I think it might be interest to the people who are listening to the podcast. This whole question of sacred sound, I think, is extremely important, and there are some studies which people might find interesting from the. In the Indian context, in the Indic context, there is a book called Sonic Theology. This just came to mind. I just remembered. I thought I should put this out there. I don't remember the author, but it's called Sonic Theology. You can Google that on Amazon. And there is a very interesting writer who's actually a musicologist, if I'm not mistaken. His name is Jocelyn Godwin. He's written a lot about sacred music and sacred sound, and he has a little volume on I think it's called the 7 vowels, because the ancient Greeks used to chant these 7 vowels of the ancient Greek language. And they claimed that it was an ancient Egyptian practice, and that this was the practice in the ancient Egyptian temples. Mm-hmm. It's a very slim volume, but he's gone into a great deal of detail there. That was really a kind of heritage which was understood in the ancient world. So I just wanted to say a word about that. Now, to turn to your question.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's great.
In fact, Plutarch, who is known for his very famous book on the lives of Greeks and Romans, Plutarch's Lives. Yes. He was an initiate. And he has a whole essay on the meaning of the letter E. I don't know if it's eta or it's epsilon or what it would be in Greek, and how that related to ancient, it's all about one letter. So this is so again, we have the importance of the letters as symbols for sacred sound. You have it, as I said, in Al-Buni and in Arabi and so forth. So about your question, the importance of keeping the occult, a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. You can hurt yourself with these things. And you can also, unfortunately, hurt others. There's always a great deal of caution and circumspection involved in passing on this knowledge to people who will not misuse it. And so that's really why it's there. It's really that simple.
This gets to the heart of the matter, because the heart of the matter is that words, especially these, as you say, these kind of luminous, multidimensional, transdimensional divine names, literally are the backbone of a successful operation, because you're drawing down the divine into, actually empowering the ritual.
There's a resonance. There's a resonance between the practitioner and the divine and the intermediates in between, these angelic and other forces, and jinnic forces. It's not just the words, but there's also the intention of the person involved. Mm-hmm. And words and intentions, words and meanings are very closely linked. Very closely linked. I mean, if you start using certain words, they will result in certain thoughts within you. They will result in certain attitudes, won't they? So it's very important, that's why they also say that you have to be careful with your speech. So I think there is a very strong connection. There is a very, very, very strong connection. I would like to give an example. It's a very recent example, and maybe it's a little, people will think it's a little popular spirituality. Fine. There was a very best-selling book, and I think it's even a movie on Amazon or on Netflix. It's called The Secret. I remember seeing this was being sold everywhere. Did you remember what I'm talking about? This is a little book.
Yes. I haven't read it, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I didn't sit down and read the whole book, but I flipped through it in a bookshop. It's not the Summa Theologia, right? I mean, you can actually flip through it standing in the book liner. It's not Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. It's essentially just the power of positive thinking, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I think they call it in the book and in the movie the law of attraction. So it's a little bit more complicated than the way they say it. You can't just think, I will be a millionaire, and if you repeat that every day, then I'm going to have $5 million. I'm going to make $1 million a month, and you just keep. But that's the kind of thing they tell you to do. It's like, okay, you must tell yourself that you're successful. You write it down on a piece of paper. You remember it before you go to sleep. You get up, and when you look in the mirror, you say it. And you find that this also occurs in people's lives. If your parents or if people close to you who are around you tell you that you're no good and that you're not going to succeed, and you hear this repeatedly for years, does it or does it not have an effect? It does. Now, if someone encourages, it doesn't necessarily mean you will be a failure. And if it's the opposite and they keep encouraging you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will achieve all of those things, but it will help. Mm-hmm. Now, imagine if you do that with a very, very concentrated intention, with proper ritual and proper words of power, mantra, or namina barba, whatever you want to call them. It will have an effect. And there is a very profane, and that is the word. It's very hard to say this in Arabic. There's no sort of sacred profane dichotomy, but as there is in English. So we have the advantage of the English language here in this situation. But there are very profane uses of this knowledge as well. And you find them in the modern world, everywhere. In terms of mass media, marketing, propaganda, where certain words and certain images are used to manipulate people constantly. And it is very much like a magical spell. It is really sihr in Arabic. And it's interesting that some people say it's a hadith, and it may or may not be, but it's a famous saying in Arabic, and they mention it when you study Arabic, what's the word in English? Balagha, Arabic rhetoric or eloquence. They'll say that bayan, that speech, has a certain magic to it. And they use the word sihr in that phrase in Arabic.
As above, so below.
As above, so below. And people who are involved in modern advertising, in mass media, in social engineering, in propaganda, they know this. And they understand it very, very well. Mm-hmm. And they're very good at manipulating people with it. The science of this is actually very, very old. And in fact, I think the first person to really write about this in the Western tradition, in the Western world, lived a very long time ago, and his name was Giordano Bruno. And he wrote about it in a treatise called On Binding. How do you bind people? And that is something worth reading. And if you really read that and think about it, you will see that all the sort of modern sort of methods of manipulating people on a mass level go back to that. I'm not saying there's a direct historical relationship, but there's a tremendous, there may well be, I haven't done the research, but the person who really makes this connection was a Romanian fellow, Culianu, and he wrote it in this book called Eros and Magic in the Renaissance.
When it comes to mass advertising and these massive spells, are there actual entities, actual sublunary, infernal, or kind of jinn-based entities that are being used to put these kind of mass delusions upon people? Or is this more of a psychological, vibrational, spiritual? I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
I would say that it is a psychological one. Okay. In the first instance. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other elements involved. There's another important book on Renaissance magic by D.P. Walker. And it's a very serious book. Remember, we were talking about sacred sound and mantras and, bija mantras and words of power in Arabic. Sound vibrations and other kinds of vibrations have an effect on human beings. There are certain kinds of music which will induce happiness, and there are certain kinds of music which will induce other kinds of feelings, whether sadness, depression, anger, what have you. I do think that certain kinds of music in advertising, these advertising jingles, they get in your head, don't they? Well, they want to get in your head. And that sort of interferes, I think, because we live in a mass advertising culture now. And it's not just mass advertising. I think the word meme is very nice. I remember when it first was coined. These things are like viruses. So the term viral is also very interesting. They get inside people's psyche. And I mean psyche in the original Greek, psyche. It gets into the soul. It makes an imprint on the psyche, on the nafs of the person. It's a psychological imprint, and it's very hard to get rid of. And ancient spirituality, particularly Sufism and these deep practices, are designed to make, in the Islamic context, to make those divine names sort of imprinted on you, on your soul. That the Quran becomes a part of you. Now that's why Muslims memorize the Quran. And if you really, really memorize it properly, it becomes a part of you. The parts which you know by heart, if you know the whole thing by heart, you can rattle it off faster than it becomes part of your soul. Now imagine someone who has never done that. What is part of their soul? All of this advertising, all of the nonsense TV shows and cartoons and whatever they have absorbed. That's why they call it programming. And in pre-modern societies, in the Islamic world, for example, people were brought up on the Quran, and there really was no popular culture in any modern sense. What was popular in terms of culture or thaqafa, true culture, which was sort of disseminated, was through literature. And the most famous forms of literature really, which had the widest dissemination, especially in later Islamic periods in the Eastern Islamic lands, was Persian Sufi poetry. So this was very deeply ingrained in people. That was their idiom. That's how they understood the world. How do people understand the world today? They see it through things which have become memes, through certain scenes in movies, through certain famous lines in movies, through lines in TV commercials. Because I grew up in the United States, I know I, thank God, have other far more decisive imprints. But in my own historical memory, I can think of phrases. I'll be back from the Terminator series. Where is Thief? It was a famous phrase which was very common from some TV commercial a long time back. There are all sorts of little memes from The Simpsons that people have. And then now within these cartoons, they have other memes with it, it references to Star Wars. Star Wars has become sort of popular culture now. Or, I don't know, maybe in 10 years it'll be Guardians of the Galaxy or whatever. I do go to certain cinema and so forth, but mainly I go to find out what is going on. What are they putting out in the popular mind now? What are they trying to do? What are the powers that be trying? So there is a psychological element, but I think that there is a deeper element as well, a deeper kind of occult element, and I think it's an infernal element. Now this is my view, and I'm sure many people will not agree with me, but this is my understanding. I truly think that there is a kind of ongoing occult warfare which is going on, and that there is a kind of infernal tendency. The whole sort of thrust of the modern world, I truly think, is diabolical. Actually, there's an interesting book. It just came out December 2017. It's called Freedom from Reality, The Diabolical Character of Modern Liberty by D.C. Schindler. Now, of course, he is a neo-Thomist. It's written from a very Catholic point of view. That's a very interesting book. And he makes the point that when he uses the word diabolical, he derives diabolos. Diabolo and symbolo, or diabolon and symbolon. I don't know, I'm not a scholar of Greek. But he derives diabolical and symbolical from the same root in Greek. It's very interesting. I think you've studied some of the classical languages, so you will have an appreciation for this much more than I would, because you've directly studied it. But I think he has a very important point. I mean, the overall thrust of the modern world is to make you forget God. Is to make you forget Allah. It's to put it in Islamic terms, it's to involve you. Again, we don't speak of sacred and profane. Dunya, that's the word. So this dunya being the world in the sense of worldliness. And dunya actually doesn't mean world in Arabic. The word for world is alam in Arabic. But dunya is that which is seemingly immediate or near at hand. It's like a clump of dates that you can just reach up and pluck off of the date palm. That's what dunya means. And so this dunyawiyya, and the whole thrust of everything is dunyawiyya. And that's why there is a tremendous spiritual hunger now. People are looking for something. Many of them don't know what it is. Some of them will turn to yoga. Some of them will turn to transcendental meditation. Somebody will become a Tibetan Buddhist. Somebody will do something. So I think there is a dimension, but I do think that it's not haphazard. I think that the overall thrust of it is directed. I am not a big advocate, metaphysically speaking, of the so-called design argument or intelligent design in proving the existence of God. I think there are better metaphysical arguments, right? But it appeals to the average person, this notion of intelligent design. Well, by the same token, this entire infernal diabolic current is far too well coordinated. There is an intelligent design. There is an intelligence behind it. That intelligence is the shaitan. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like Allah has His earthly representative in our time. For the Shias, it's the 12th Imam. For the Sunni Sufi types, it's the axial saint of our time. The person who is the most perfect embodiment of the manifestation of the divine names. Well, you have his antipode as well. And that antipode is called the Antichrist or a Dajjal. So in that sense, and I'm sure many people are now just thinking, what is this guy saying? And they're not going to like what I'm saying, but that's fine. But there is a kind of intelligence that is behind it. And it's what we call in Arabic a Dajjal. And there are in fact books on this by Muslims in English that have espoused this kind of idea, this thing. But many Muslims actually do think in this way. So whether or not you believe there's some sort of person or intelligence behind it is another matter. But I think most people would agree that the 20th century and the 21st century really are the secular centuries. It's a secular age. It's an unprecedented period in human history where the sacred doesn't have a central place in people's lives. And that also explains why many people think, what the whole topic of all your podcasts is, what is all this mumbo jumbo? What is the occult? This stuff doesn't exist. There's no devils. There's no demons. There's no angels. There's no God. There's no spiritual world. It's all matter and lifeless matter in motion. It's scientism, which functions like a religion nowadays. I mean, it's not true religion, but it is a kind of religion. It's a kind of counter-tradition, or in fact I would say it's an anti-tradition or an anti-religion, passing itself off, not as a religion, but it has that same sort of, they would be the first to say, no, it's not a religion, but it makes the same kind of totalizing demands that a religion would. And it has this kind of power in the world today.
Joseph Peterson, who's a fantastic editor, he's done a lot of academic research, going through tons of folios. He put the definitive edition of the Lemegeton and the Sworn Book of Honorius. He's also a practicing Zoroastrian. He said, a lot of, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said that effectively some occultists say you can deal with infernal spirits if you do it respectfully, you can build relationships and without losing your soul, etc. But he said that as a Zoroastrian, the cosmology of the Zoroastrian religion is very, very... He just said, I am a dualist. There is light and there is darkness. And as a Zoroastrian, you believe that there are forces of light and there are absolutely forces of darkness. And so he makes, which I think is similar to the Islamic view, which is, there's Dhulam, and then there's Nur, and there's, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then there's the way of the shaitan. So there is a very dualistic view where there is light and there is darkness, which, as you said, is the opposite of today. Today, well, it's all kind of the same, and we're just a bunch of electrons and atoms that are constant in constellations of flesh and water, and we're hurling through the black abyss of space at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and it's all the same. There really is no light and darkness, but there is this dichotomy there, at least with that.
Yes, well, I'll have to listen to that podcast. I'm fascinated to come across practicing Zoroastrians. It's such a minority community now. I'm fascinated by Zoroastrianism. It exists in India, but I have to say that I think I'd have to disagree a little bit here and say that, there is a dichotomy. Muslims would say, yes, there is, as you very correctly put it in Arabic, there's a zilam, or there's darkness, and there's a nur, and there's light. Al-dhulumat also is another word, very equivalent. Al-dhulumat wa nur, darkness and light. But there isn't a dualism. Now, perhaps, I don't know, there are various interpretations of Zoroastrianism. I'm not an expert on Zoroastrianism. So I couldn't tell you, is it a genuine dualism? Maybe that's the take of this particular person. I don't know. I cannot speak for Zoroastrianism. I'm not a scholar of Zoroastrianism. But when it comes to Islam, it's certainly not a dualism. There is a recognition that there is good and evil. But if by dualism you mean that there are two competing principles that are somehow equal, that's not the Muslim belief, certainly. And right. You weren't really trying to say that, but I don't want anyone to get get a misunderstanding. The Muslim sort of deeper philosophical theological understanding is that evil is actually privative.
In addition to your academic work, you're also extremely well-traveled, and you've had a lot of experiences. And I'm wondering, can you share with our listeners a little bit about any experiences that you may have had regarding either the approach of infernal beings or being involved in, say, an exorcism ritual? What does exorcism mean in terms of the Islamic context versus, like, we always talk about movies. We think of the Catholic Exorcist movie in the 70s. Can you talk about this? And I think this is a good topic because it follows your observation about evil in the world and this kind of subtle manipulation. So can you share about any kind of experiences that you think our listeners may find interesting or benefit from?
Sure, I could do that, but before I do that, I want to make it clear I am no longer involved in this area. So I don't want to get people emailing me and saying, can you do this and do that? I am no longer doing this. I got involved in some cases of demonic possession, of, shall we say, haunting or poltergeist phenomenon, as they're sometimes referred to in the English language. And I really wasn't looking for such an experience, but circumstances were such that I became sucked in, as it were. There is a tremendous amount of interest and fascination, and that's the real word, fascination, in the general public about this. And it cuts across all religions, Muslim, non-Muslim, Christian, whatever, non-religious people. And there's a tremendous popularity in Western popular culture, also in film, a certain subgenre within the horror genre, right? And of course, the famous movie, which is based on a novel, which was based on an actual exorcism, which was performed under Catholic auspices. Of course, in the actual case, it was a boy, not a girl. So the famous movie has a girl. A lot of the phenomenon, I think, which is depicted there in terms of the actual behavior of the possessed individual is accurate. I cannot speak for the Catholic ritual. I am not a Catholic. I don't know if that was an accurate depiction. My understanding is that exorcisms in Catholicism can only be performed under the permission of the bishop, although there are some people who have challenged that. Most famous, of course, would have been Malachi Martin, a fascinating figure who wrote a very interesting book, which your listeners may find interesting, called Hostage to the Devil. It's a fascinating read, much better than any of the other books which have been written by Catholics on exorcism, in my view. Other recent films which depict such phenomenon, occult phenomenon, which are quite accurate, frighteningly accurate, in fact, was the first couple of installments of Paranormal Activity. Those are two kind of accurate ones, and then, people just started making all sorts of films. The behavior which is shown in the film, The Exorcist, by the character portraying the possessed individual is pretty accurate. I don't know about the actual Catholic, what I said, because I have to be very frank and honest. I'm very suspicious. I have very strong doubts about the efficacy of Catholic exorcism. Of course, I'm speaking as a Muslim. I have to be very honest. And I don't really believe in Christianity. I don't believe that one can be very successful with those sorts of methods because they involve what a Muslim will call shirk, which is associating partners with Allah. And this Christian belief or Catholic belief that it's only in the name of Jesus Christ that demons can be exorcised is certainly refuted by the Muslim experience. I don't know what Catholic theologians would say to that. Maybe they would say, well, the Muslims didn't really succeed. There's all sorts of, when you get into a theological debate, how you can argue the topic. But I have to say I'm very suspicious of of all that. And then you've got the Protestants who say, well, you know, that's a whole other kind of Christianity. You don't need a permission from a bishop or anything. There's no priesthood, right? And they also claim to go around casting out demons and so on and so forth. There is an element of calling in. There are people who open themselves up to demonic attack. And in the Muslim context, though, if you are a truly genuine and deeply pious person, a demon is not going to be able to get you. It doesn't work that way. There are cases where people are tormented by demons in different situations. What typically happens in the Muslim world, unfortunately, and what I'm about to tell you is completely haram, is completely forbidden. Mm-hmm. And the person who does these kind of things is putting their soul in mortal danger. So there is something called sihr. There is something called magic. If you know certain things about a person, if there's someone you don't like, if there's someone you are jealous of because they're more successful than you, or their kids are doing better in school, or they're just doing better in life, and you want to get back at them, or you want to attack them just out of envy, and this is called hasad in Arabic, mm-hmm. or because they're your business competitor, or what have you. You know, people have various dunyawi or worldly motivations to do what they do. And so in the Islamic world, there are people who resort to magical means, to sihr. And I'm using now magic in the way that I defined it in the earlier podcasts, as an actual recourse to demonic entities through the commission of all sorts of, haram activities or forbidden activities. Involving desecration of the sacred and so on. I gave a specific definition in the first podcast, so people should go back to that one. So this is completely forbidden, but people do it. And there are sorcerers in the Muslim world. And they will, for a fee, be happy to help you out if you want to pay them. And it may work, it may not work, and the better ones charge more, and there's all this sort of stuff involved. So what happens oftentimes is a person then comes under a kind of sihr or magical attack. And that will involve some sort of a sublunary infernal attack by a jinn. And that jinn may oppress them, meaning they may feel extremely depressed, they may lose motivation, they may just sort of sit around in their room and not want to do anything, they will lose interest in their normal activities, their normal social relationships, they may sort of stare off into space, but they're not really possessed. They're under a kind of state of oppression. Mm-hmm. And then there's other levels where the demon actually gradually takes them over, in which they will, under certain circumstances, transform, or they will do things and they can also induce illness. All of a sudden, someone will develop a cancer, for example, for no reason, or some other strange illness, and they'll go to doctors and physicians, and no one will know what's wrong, and the treatment won't work. So what do you do? Well, in those kind of situations, you have to resort to someone who knows how to break the magic. Then there are people who just simply get possessed by accident. So the jinn do exist. They are mentioned in the Quran. Any Muslim who says that jinn don't exist is contradicting the Quran. So a Muslim could only really do that out of ignorance. They're explicitly mentioned in the Quran. The word jinn means hidden. It comes from an Arabic root that means hidden. And that's why from the same root, you get the word janeen, which refers to the fetus, because it is hidden. Once a child is born, it's no longer a janeen. It's a child in the world. So the jinn do exist. Strangely enough, they have a free will. And this is something which we don't find much discussion of in Islamic theological texts, at least that I've come across. Because human beings also have a free will. Angels don't have free will. Jinn apparently have a predilection towards mischief, whereas human beings' inherent nature is toward goodness. There is this ancient enmity then between jinn and human beings. So they generally tend to be hostile. In some reports, not in the Quran, mind you. So this is not, what I'm saying is not in the Quran, it's in the reports, in akhbar, historical tradition, which may or may not be, it's indigenous Arabic Islamic historical tradition, very ancient, which may or may not be reliable. Hadiths, supposed statements of things which are purported, not supposed, statements of the Prophet Muhammad that may be authentic, they may be reliable, they may not be, talk about how, the jinn populated the earth before human beings.
Okay.
As human beings have expanded, there's less and less space for the jinn to live in. So this is one reason I think that many people who have gone to remote areas, I remember in the early days, in the glory days of the British Empire, at the height of the Great Game, and when there were people who were trying to get to Tibet and who were traipsing around the Himalayas, climbing around, they would have reports of these strange creatures, the abominable snowman, or of Bigfoot, the Sasquatch. Now, I'm not necessarily saying these things exist, but oftentimes people go in remote areas and they see weird stuff. Yeah. Or they say that's where the jinn are living. So the jinn live in more and more remote. So you say, well, how can they see them if they're hidden? Well, jinn can take on various forms. Jinn are shapeshifters. They can assume different guises. And it seems that jinn, their default sort of form, generally tends to be extremely repulsive and frightening to human beings. So they tend to be, in their natural form, quite hideous to our perceptions and our understanding of beauty or comeliness or what have you.
Yes.
For the human being, they have a very terrifying visage.
Okay.
And they're typically described as reptilian, something like that. And they usually are very small. So this idea, for example, of dwarves, of fairies, of gargoyles, that you find in different world mythologies. In Shinto, in Japan.
Yeah, Shinto, yeah.
You find that these creatures called the Tengu, who are really demons. And oddly enough, many of the founders of different martial arts schools, traditional martial arts in Japan, pre-World War II, classical, samurai era sort of stuff, different fencing schools and so forth, they would often undergo a period of spiritual purification at a Shinto shrine, and they would just train constantly, typically for 1,000 days. And then they would have a vision, and typically the Tengu would come and teach them sword techniques or spear techniques or what have you. So some of these Japanese traditional fencing schools and sword schools have scrolls where they write down the techniques, and if you train all the way to the end and they present you with a scroll and you become a so-called Menkyo Kaiden, you have been given an ijaza, a kind of degree or something, and you've been given the secret scrolls. And if you look in some of these, some of which have been published and made public, you find drawings of Tengu, and they are some hideous-looking reptilian creatures. I found really strange when I was, once upon a time I was very fascinated by things Japanese, and I was researching many aspects of traditional Japanese martial arts culture. I came across these things. So they are sort of dwarfish, elvish, short, sort of, and they can change their form. They can, in fact, in an instant make themselves appear as though they are very tall. And they can shrink down, you see. And so they also, then they're shapeshifters, they also can sort of manipulate the way we think and our perceptions. This is my understanding, and Allah knows best. Right? Because information on this is hard to come by, and you can go on your own experience, and people have slightly different experiences on this. So these jinns are pretty scary. And so they often live in remote areas. But what happens is, if you leave a house empty for a very long time, they can come and inhabit the place. And then they can do things to scare you away so that the people who are the humans living there will leave. I don't know if you ever saw a movie called The Others. That's what's happening in that movie. So you've got these people living in this house, and you think that their house is haunted, but they are the ones who are haunting the house.
Yeah, they're the ones.
Kids are the ones who are haunting the house without. Right? So it's something like that. And there was my own experience, so I don't have to change any names here. I can tell you this actually happened to me. There was a time when I lived in the United Arab Emirates for a few years when I was teaching at the American University of Sharjah. And it was a beautiful campus. And we all lived on campus. There were faculty housing and all this kind of thing. And anyway, we had some weird experiences when we moved in there. And I wondered about them for a long time. And then after I'd lived in the UAE for a while, I heard it was actually reported in the local press. There's a shopping mall. You may have heard about it. I don't know if it made the news here. It's called Mall of the Emirates. And it's, the shopping malls are a big deal in the UAE. And it has a ski jump inside the mall. We never went ski jumping there, but every now and then a friend of mine and I would like to go out there. It was kind of far away, and we would drive out there. And on the way, there's just open desert on that highway. It's somewhat changed, but it's more or less the same now. And there would be, in the middle of the desert, these groves of these thickly grown trees. And I always wondered about those just from the point of view of flora and fauna. How is this stuff growing? There must be an underground stream or something. So in the press, they reported that a lot of people who had ended up getting villas and houses there were vacating and selling, and they were really scared, and there was actually some strange murders that took place there, strange goings on. And then they reported this local tradition that these trees, which were called ghaf trees in the local dialect apparently, were traditionally held to be where the jinn would live. So then I found out that when they built the campus, they apparently just cut down a bunch of these ghaf trees. They were all over the place. And so when we first moved into our apartment, I heard, and my wife heard several times, in broad daylight, the sound of little children, like girls, going up and down our stairs. And we had this beautiful marble staircase that went upstairs. And these were nice houses. And I thought, this is weird. It must be a sound from outside. Where is this sound coming from? Then I thought it was the neighbors. And then I didn't think much about it. For a while I thought, well, maybe it's the neighbors, because these were sort of link houses in the sense, sort of a British way. You would have, like they have in Britain, you would have one of your walls would be shared to the next unit, to the next unit, to the next unit. Even though and so the staircases would be, your staircase is on one side, the other person's staircase is on the other side. So I thought, well, it must be my neighbor's kids. And then I realized, no, the kids hadn't come yet. He moved in, and it was 2 weeks later into the semester that his family joined him from Sri Lanka. He was a Sri Lankan gentleman. And there were these strange goings on in the house. I couldn't quite understand what it was, but I didn't think too much about it because it wasn't creepy, you understand. And there was maybe an alternative explanation. Oh, maybe it's the kids playing outside, because there were a lot of kids. A lot of the faculty there were young. I was much younger at the time, but little kids, and the kids would always be playing outside, and there was a playground nearby,
Okay.
And so maybe it's, the sounds are coming in from the window there. And this went on, and in the back, there was a huge area of grass and all of this. And then one night, my wife went into the children's room to check on them, as mothers often do. And she looked out the back, their room, which opened out onto the back yard area. And there was a swing set down, which is sort of a common park area for the community. She said there was a woman sitting on the swing wearing long, sort of glowing kind of white gown with a small child with long hair. And the person was swinging, this person, and then looked up at my wife, and she just completely lost it. And she came running to me and said, look, there's somebody down there. You have to. I said, what are you talking about? I was reading a book as usual. He was really, really scared.
Wow. So
I said, all right. So, like I said, I was very interested in Japan once upon a time, and that was one of the times. And so I grabbed my Japanese wooden training sword, my bokuto, and I ran downstairs. It was late at night. It was something like 2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And there was nothing there. But the swing, and mind you, it was a tire swing. So it was a very large kind of tractor tire, and it was turned horizontal, and it was held like on a tripod of chains. You understand? It was a horizontal tire. It wasn't hanging vertically. And the swing was moving.
Oh, my gosh.
I thought, this is very, very strange, you see. And there's no wind or anything. And then there were times when I would come downstairs in the morning, and the television would be on. And this happened to my wife several times also. She said, how come you leave the TV on and go to sleep? I said, I don't. But I thought this was very strange. So there was these kind of activities, these strange things happening. And then so one night, especially in those days, I used to stay up very, very late and study. And so I was down in the living room in front of the TV, but I was not watching it, but I was sitting directly across it on a couch. And I was reading. And as I was reading, the TV came on.
That's like Paranormal Activity.
Yes. And then I thought, no, this is strange. I sort of looked up and I thought, oh no, the remote is here. Maybe my leg pressed on the remote and turned it on. So, that thought went through my head like in like a second. I'm holding my book. I hardly look up from the book. And I just lifted up the remote and I clicked it off and the TV went off. And then I put down the remote and it went on again. So I did this a couple of times and I just clicked it off and it came on again. So then I got up and I went and I turned off the main, the TV screen, so then the remote shouldn't work. Then I went and sat down on the couch and the TV came on again. And then I thought, this is really annoying. Usually I wasn't scared, but I thought, this is just really annoying. How could this be happening? And then I thought, all right, let me try one more thing. So I'm not really concerned yet. So I pushed the whole shelving and so forth, and I pulled the plug out of the TV. And I thought that should do it. And then I went, and before I sat down, before I turned my back, the TV comes on again.
What?
Then I thought, this is a serious matter. So I put down my book, and it is my habit to always be in a state of ritual purity according to Islamic law as much as possible.
Yes, yes.
And I was at that moment. So then I set aside my book and proceeded to recite various things. And I did this for, 15, 20, 30 minutes. I didn't have a watch. I wasn't looking at the clock. And then the TV went off. And then I thought, finally. And I went back to my book and continued reading.
A true academic until the very end.
I didn't tell anybody about it the next day. And then my wife woke up. She came and said, what were you doing? Why did you move these shelves around? You've left. I said, never mind. I was looking for something. I didn't tell her about it until months later because she would have gotten really scared. And so we didn't have this problem again. There were other friends of mine, close friends of mine. There was a neighbor who lived in another part of the complex. He was gone for one summer, and I was going to be there for a while, and he wanted me to go to his house and feed the fish in his absence. My kids were really small at that time. I said, all right, let's go and feed the fish at our friend's house.
Yeah.
And we drove over there, and we went inside, and my daughter just got really scared and said that there are some small creatures walking out of that door, because there was a hallway. The fish tank was in the hallway, and the hallway led into one door, which led into the kitchen. All of these units had a similar floor plan. And there was a living room on this side, and he was a close friend of mine, and our families grew around the same time, and so we had very similar sort of setup in his house. So he had a swing for his baby, like I had in my house also, hanging in the same place. And then I noticed the swing was moving, really moving. So my kids got scared, and then they left, and I was left standing there with the fish food with my youngest son, who, for whatever reason, was saying he didn't get scared. And I thought, well, this is really very strange. And then so I stood there for a while, and I just stopped the swing from swinging, and it stopped. And I fed the fish and left, and then I questioned my daughter several times about this experience over the next few days, and she would always give the same account. So I went back over there, and there was a definite feeling of dread. There was some sort of thing there that didn't want us to be there. So I informed my friend. He said, yeah, don't worry about it. That's obviously what's going on, is there's some jinnic activity. And I said, no, don't worry. I don't want to, I'll just keep feeding the fish. I didn't mind. I don't get scared. And then, mind you, and I'm still feeding the fish, all right? When he comes back, he told me, I said, well, what happened? He said, all the fish were dead. And I said, no, but I was feeding them. He said, it's worse than that. They were all out of the tank, and they were on the floor in front.
What?
So they can't leap out, and there's a screen at the top of the fish tank.
Oh, my gosh.
So as a result of all this, we all did various purifications for the houses.
Okay.
And then we just have this problem afterwards. So these are some simple cases in which I was involved, but then there were others, which were actual cases of possession and magical attack.
Okay.
On one occasion, I was approached about a demonic presence in someone's house. And, I'm just going to keep this one very general because I don't want anyone to figure out anything about, we want to respect the privacy of people. I mean, the other things I told you about were things which happened to me, and I don't mind.
Really quick, for our listeners who are not Muslim, when you say demonic, do you mean jinn presence always? Yeah.
I mean jinn. Typically it was a jinn situation, and I was informed of this by a friend of mine. I was quite surprised, and he described the situation that, there's this house, and there's this one room which the people of the house think is completely haunted, and there's some sort of jinnic thing there. This is their daughter's room, and the daughter is never able to sleep in the room, and she's just frightened. Apparently she did still use that as her bedroom, but, she was having these sleepless nights, and she was really terrified. And says, well, let's go over, will you go over there? I said, all right, let's go and see. Now, I didn't ask him about this girl, and when we went over there, we found out she's not a girl. She's in her 20-something. And she's really, really scared. And the other people in the family, like the father and some of the others, just thought that she was just imagining things. And some of the other, I think, female family members believed her. And I thought, all right, whatever it is whatever it is. So I said, all right, let's go up to the room. And I went up to the room with my friend. As soon as I went there, I knew this was a serious problem. So I said, all right, look, you go back downstairs, and I'm going to close the door. And no matter what you hear, don't come in. And he said, all right. So then he left, And as soon as I shut the door, I wanted to leave the room. There was a tremendous feeling of discomfort and dread. This was orders of magnitude, powers of 10, more difficult.
And just a very intense dark cloud of just total malevolence, basically.
Total malevolence. And so I still had to pray the Maghrib and the Isha prayers.
Yes.
So the sunset and the night prayers. And so I proceeded to make the call to prayer. And it was a very creepy room because there was this really disgusting painting hanging in the room. Yeah, and it was actually, there was no hideous scene. It was actually a scene of a flower on a black background, but I could tell there was just something wrong with this picture. And so I faced in the direction of Mecca to do the prayer, and I started with the call to prayer. And it was awkward. It was a small room, so the painting is behind me, and right in front of me is the mirror in the room. So mirrors are a problem. If some of your listeners will be acquainted with the kind of problems you can have with mirrors.
Oh, yeah. Yep, definitely.
So I just proceeded to make the call to prayer. And as soon as I did that, it was as though something jumped on my back, in the sense that I felt a weight. But I continued. I followed through. I did my prayers, the Muslim, 5, canonical prayers. And I finished those. And then I sat down and I began to recite a prayer from the Shadhali Tariqah known as the Hizb al-Bahr, among other things, the orison of the sea, and among other things. And as I was reciting it, and the whole time when I was doing my prayers, I felt the weight getting heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. And as I was reciting also, it was just getting harder and harder and harder, like something was trying to say, get out of here. And I was keeping my composure and saying, I'm not going anywhere. And mind you, I'm looking in this silly mirror the whole time, trying not to look in the mirror while I'm doing this, because the mirror is bad news. So I just continued and continued and continued, and I would say about halfway through what I was doing, it was gone. The whole thing was just relieved. And I continued and continued and followed through and did various things to close what I was doing.
Yes.
And it was over, and I was really exhausted, and I went back downstairs, and that was the end of it. And then we left a little bit later.
Wow.
Nothing happened to me afterwards, alhamdulillah. Sometimes things can happen to you. You can get sick and so forth. So that was one case. And then after that, they never had any problem before. And before I left, I said, listen, don't ask me why, but I need you to destroy that painting and just throw it out, please. So we don't know what happened. And before I went up there, in fact, I questioned them. I said, do you own this house? How long have you lived here? It was, X number of years they had lived there. And then I said, who had lived here before? Had they done anything? Were there any murders in this house? Were there any suicides? Because Muslims don't have a belief in ghosts, you understand, where you have someone who has passed on, who has died, and somehow their spirit is wandering around. You don't have that situation. It's just not part of the Muslim theology or belief. But what you can have is, especially if someone has died a violent death, murder, suicide, what have you, and they have not had proper funeral rites, there is a kind of psychological residue or imprint which is left on the place. And people who then live there will experience that. They'll see it in dreams, and it will torment them, because that person did not receive a proper funeral rite, you see. So it's not so much that their spirit is wandering around, but that there is a kind of psychological residue. It is my understanding that it's like this, and Allah knows best. By far, the most bizarre and frightening case I've ever been involved in. I was approached out of the blue by some people. Yeah, I'll just have to leave it at that, because I don't want people to figure out anything from this.
Sure, of course. But you were approached, like you weren't seeking out anything. Someone came to you.
Someone came to me, a group of people came to me and said, look, there's this person and he's close to us and he needs help. He has a demon. I said, come on. Are you sure? And they said, look, no. Yes, we're sure. And I said, well, look, I really don't want to get involved in this. The way they compelled me was they actually knew someone who knew me, and they used them as a reference. And it was a situation where I had to say, I couldn't say no. You understand?
Absolutely.
There's all these 50-odd Muslim countries, and there's no Ottoman Empire, and there's no Mughal Empire, and there's no Safavid Empire anymore. But there is an empire of culture. So wherever you go, you could be Muslim, you go in China, and you'll still find things very, very similar among Muslims, right? So
you were begrudgingly bound by the very polite chains of Muslim culture to do this.
Yeah, adab. Adab is the word in Arabic.
Adab, yeah.
The ties of adab and so forth. And I thought, all right, let's just see what this involves.
Okay.
And so I agreed to meet with this individual. And I said, well, I'm not going to do anything. I'll be happy to meet with this person, just talk to him and see what's going on.
Sure.
And they said, okay. And again, following the whole Muslim adab and etiquette and so forth, they insisted that they take me out to dinner. Take me for a meal. And what I didn't realize was I thought we were going to go and have, a meal and then go and meet this guy. They brought him to the meal.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Yeah, and this was at a restaurant. So we'd more or less finished eating. It was time for tea and dessert. And I was just sort of sipping my tea. They said, well, would you have a word with him now? I said, yeah, sure. And mind you, it was a large party. There were a lot of us.
Yes.
And so they all sort of sat aside, all of his friends, and I think there was some extended family of his, and all this business. And so I sat with him, and he sat across with me on this table. And I said, well, look, how long have you had this problem? He said, well, it's been a number of years. I think he said 7 or 8 years. I said, well, that's a really long time.
Wow.
And I said, what have you been doing? He said, well, I've been going to such and such a fellow. And I said, really? Where is he? Oh, he's in another, I go to him every so often. And I said, well, what has he been doing? He said, well, he's been reciting the various sort of verses from the Quran and then reciting them and then blowing on some water and sprinkling the water on him and giving him water to drink and things like this. Standard procedures, actually. It's called ruqya in Arabic.
Oh, ruqya. Yeah. Okay.
So I said, all right. What happens? He said, well, it sort of works and I feel better, but it doesn't go away. And I asked him who the person was, and he told me a particular name, and I thought, okay, I think this is such and such person who I'd heard vaguely about. And I said, well, is this individual, is he an adherent of the Salafi interpretation of Islam? Is he a Wahhabi, in other words?
Right.
And he said, yes, actually he is. And I said, aha, I see, well, that's your problem. So for the people who don't know, the Salafis, who are also known as Wahhabis, but they decry that label, they are a kind of literalist, reductionist, people might disagree with me, but this is, again, it's my understanding, interpretation of Islam that is very much against more esoteric sort of practices that you find in Sufism. They're against the notion of awliya or people who are considered to be close to God. Sometimes people translate the term awliya as saints. I usually do not, but this is not a exercise in translation, so we'll just say, so they're against the notion of sainthood in Islam. They're against the idea of intercession and things like this. And most importantly, they see the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as just an ordinary historical individual and is gone now and has no sort of other extraordinary spiritual powers. He's essentially a postman, as it were, that he brought a message and he delivered it and now he is gone. So I said to him, well, that's your problem, you see. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you can't really succeed in this area unless you truly believe in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as al-insanul kamil, as the perfect man, as a primordial light, which is the first thing to be created by Allah, and that this Muhammadan light or this Muhammadan reality, an-nur al-Muhammadi in Arabic, or al-haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya in Arabic also, is truly powerful and efficacious. So the recitation of benedictions upon this reality has to be part and parcel of the practice which is involved in ridding you of this demonic and infernal force. This is what I tried to impress upon this man. And he said that he was a Salafi as well. And I said, well, look, this is a very serious problem. And I said, but anyhow, it's fine. All you have to do is go to a non-Salafi person. You should be able to find such people in this place where you live. They're actually around.
Sure.
And that should solve your problem. Okay. And then I said, all right, now I'm going to drink my tea and get back and eat my dessert. And at that moment, he said to me, you are making me angry. And he started breathing like this. And then his neck sort of cocked to one direction. And then his jaw deformed and his shoulder went up in a kind of hunchback. And he was obviously in a contorted, very uncomfortable position. And his voice changed. And he said to me, I am not leaving. And at that point I thought, what have I gotten myself into? Because I had never, ever done this before. But I knew what had to be done. So I started reciting various things, which I knew by heart. And I didn't know what this was going to involve. So one of the people who had brought me to this place, I signaled to him to go to the car and get some things which I had in the car, which were in a backpack. Different texts which I didn't know by heart, maybe I might need them. And so this is what I did. So I started reciting, and he became extremely uncomfortable. And he started frothing at the mouth. And all of this sort of spit started coming down like on the side of his mouth, you see. And he became extremely uncomfortable. And then he proceeded he had on one of those jackets with a hood. And so then he pulled the hood over his head. And then he got up and he tried to leave. And I remember we're in a restaurant. And I don't remember now. I think there were some people, but I think they left by the time this had started. And I told them, just go close the restaurant. Don't let anybody else come in here. And so then he got up and sort of very quickly moved to a booth, how like you have in these restaurants. And he went under the table and on that booth, the couch part of the booth, and almost was trying to get in. Like there wasn't enough room for a fetal position, mind you, but he turned his back to me and had this hood on over him. So I just gave chase, and in fact, the table wasn't fixed to the ground, so I just pushed it aside with all my power. Wow. And I went behind him, and I pulled his hood off of him, and I turned him around, and I got right up in his face, and I kept going. Anyhow, this went on for quite a while. I'm not sure exactly how long. And he moved around again and was going around the floor of the restaurant like this. Jeez. And then eventually he started feeling nauseous. And they brought him a waste paper basket or a bucket or something, and he proceeded to vomit a significant amount into this vessel. I was doing all this, I was very curious to look at all of the symptoms, and the vomit was clear, unlike in the Exorcist movie where it's not. And interesting enough, there was no odor. Anyhow, I remember quite vividly.
Part of the procedure, you think of traditional Catholic exorcism, and is reading in Latin, ecclesiastical Latin, etc. And usually nothing happens until you get to the name of the creature. If you call it out by name.
Yeah, we don't have this problem.
Okay.
We don't have this. We don't problematize it in that way.
Okay.
I know that there are some Muslims who actually try and make the jinn become a Muslim, and if the jinn doesn't leave, I didn't do any of that.
Okay.
I just went reciting this thing with the intention that you must leave this person and set them free. So this went on, and then after he vomited, he sort of came back to himself, and then he sat down, and anyhow. So we sort of concluded that, and I went back, and then these people got in touch with me the next day, and they said he actually feels a lot better, and he's never felt this good since 7 or 8 years or what have you. But he still feels there's still some force oppressing him. And naturally, this just sort of happened like that, unplanned. But would you be willing to actually come over to his house and do a proper ritual along these lines? I said, well, now I've really gotten myself in deep, so I can't really say no. This time we went prepared, and I said, all right. And I talked to these friends and family of his, and I said, all right, I can do this, but I need you to get me various things, which I didn't have with me. This took place during one of my travels. And I can say that it was in the Western world, so I wasn't sure that these things which I needed would be easily obtainable.
And obviously you think of, in the Catholic sense, holy water. Is somehow consecrated water, is that used in this?
Yes, it is. Okay. And it is recited and blown upon, and sometimes you actually write on paper itself, which is then dissolved. Or you write on a plate, and then you wash the water off and then pour it into a glass and sprinkle the person, or they would drink it, and you might even sprinkle it around different parts of the house. So this is the kind of things we needed, but we also needed to do certain suffumigations as well. So to do these kind of writings and prepare the water, I needed some essence of rose. And so I sent these guys out and I said, I need some essence of rose, I need some mustard seeds for the fumigations, and all this kind of thing.
Sure.
So then we go to his house at midnight. Or something like that. It was pretty late because that's when he was free. I said, all right, fine.
The perfect hour, midnight.
Perfect hour. When we got there, he was absolutely fine. But then as soon as we started, I don't say the entity, I'll say an entity returned or manifested. Much more force. And that's why I took I took a bunch of people with me. because he had to be held down. He became extremely strong. He was a tough guy. He used to do weights and stuff. And it was really hard to hold him down, and he flung everybody off of him at one point, and they held him down again, and he was threatening to kill us all and stuff like this.
Ugh.
And this went on for about 2.5, 3 hours. And at one point when I was reciting some of these Nomina Barbara, he actually looked up at me and said, "This isn't going to work. You're not even reciting in Arabic." He was taunting me. Nonsense, because it did work. And at the point when he did that, I had my prayer beads in my hand, and I slapped him across the face with the beads as hard as I could. And I continued, and again after that, then it was gone. But the problem in these cases is, in some of these cases, how did this person become possessed? He was a very pious person. He used to go to the mosque. And he wasn't doing any bad stuff, any sort of things which would open him up to this. So what happened? Someone did a magic spell on him. Someone did sihr against him for whatever envious reasons. Now, the problem is that sometimes when people do this, they'll go to a particularly powerful sorcerer. And what the sorcerer does is that he not only gets a jinn after him, he gets an entire family, an entire tribe. A tribe is a family, and that's the word we'd use in Arabic, qabila, tribe. But remember, a tribe is a family. He'll get a whole tribe of jinns after the person. So I can go, or someone can go and get rid of one, or even kill it. Then they'll send another. And these tribes are big. So how do you solve the problem? You have to go to the Shaykh al-Qabila. You have to go to the tribal chieftain and tell him to call off his people, so to speak. Or you have to kill him. Now that's very, very difficult to do. And a lot of people at that point, when they realize that this is the situation, they step back and say, I can't do any more. Because you might be a very, very proficient practitioner of these things. So what happens then? If you keep going, and if you decide to go and take out the chief, it's just like what happens in the films. You might be an excellent martial artist or assassin, right? But then when you go after the whole crime family, what do? They go after your wife. They go after your girlfriend. They go after, in the films.
Yes.
In Islam, we don't have girlfriends, right? They go after your children. They go after your loved ones, right?
Right.
It's exactly what, so it's something like that. It's something like that. So if you take it to the next level, so to speak, so will they. Then they will come after you. So you have to be very, very, know what you're doing. So that was one case. And then after that, there were a fair number of other ones, but they were very similar. And so what happens is, there are very, very proficient people who actually do know how to do this and can take it to the next level, but there are very few of them in the Islamic world. Or there are very few ones who are really, really honest, unfortunately. It's also like the medical profession. You have a lot of people then who actually know how to do these things who also end up charging exorbitant fees. And so there's a certain exploitation, unfortunately, that also gets involved among some of these practitioners. And then in different parts of the Muslim world, there are certain Sufi shrines and so forth where you can go, where they actually have a whole sort of jinn hospitals, in the sense that you have people who are possessed and they bring them there and they actually treat them. And it's often a long process, but usually the most difficult cases are where some sort of magic has been involved, where the person wasn't calling, they weren't, opening themselves up to it, but they were subject to attack. I'll just give you one final little sort of story to conclude this. There is a call-in show, a religious call-in show on one of the, it's a Pakistani religious call-in show. Okay. I've actually never seen it, but I was told this by a friend and fellow researcher in this area who saw this on one of these Pakistani satellite channels. And it's a religious call-in show.
Okay.
And, the Muslim community is very diverse, and in India and Pakistan there are Sunni Muslims and there are Shiite Muslims. So on this show they have a Sunni scholar and a Shiite scholar. So you can call in and ask whoever or both or whatever you want. So on one of these call-in shows, a woman called in and said, I have a very peculiar problem. Can you both help me with this? And she proceeded to describe how she had been to Mecca several times. And every time she's gone, she cannot see the Kaaba. And the Kaaba, for people who don't know what it is the cubical structure which is in the Grand Mosque of Mecca. And Muslims around the world pray towards Mecca, they pray towards the Grand Mosque, they pray towards the Kaaba, this cubical structure, the foundations of which are believed by Muslims to have been built by Abraham and Ishmael. Ibrahim and Ismail in Islam. So this is the Kaaba. And when you go on the pilgrimage to Mecca, whether it's the lesser pilgrimage or the greater pilgrimage taking place only during a certain month, the last month of the Islamic lunar calendar, and the lesser pilgrimage any time of the year, the major rite of that is the circumambulation, or the walking around counterclockwise in a circle around this cuboid structure, known as the Kaaba, which simply means cube or cuboid. And she had been there and she had not been able to see it. Now, this is a person who doesn't suffer from vision impairment. They're certainly not blind, and their vision is certainly unaffected in other contexts. So you know what they said, and they both agreed. They said, you must have done something really serious. Would you like to tell us what you've been up to? Then she confessed on air that she had gone to a sorcerer, taken the services of this sorcerer to kill someone using a jinn. And this involved, she actually explained what it involved. It involved the writing of a talisman. Then this talisman would be taken to a graveyard. And the person then would have to go to a grave of a recently deceased person, dig up the grave, and mind you, you'd have to be very serious. You'd have to get around the rigor mortis, and you'd have to open the jaw of the corpse, place the talisman in the mouth.
That is disconcerting.
And so both the Sunni and the Shiite scholar on the program said that no one can help you. You are doomed. So it's a sin which you can't get away from. Unfortunately, There are things out there like this. So that realm is real. These things do happen. I'm sure that there are people who are going to hear this and say, well, this is just these kooky religious believers is going on with these. But there's also a huge number of people who know that what we are saying, that this realm is true. It does exist. And, the Richard Dawkins and the Christopher Hitchens and the other types and the Sam Harrises of the world can continue on their merry way.
The difference between being an armchair magician, so to speak, someone who just reads a lot of books and can theorize, oh yes, the four cardinal directions and the four demon kings, versus someone like you who's actually seen these things up close. There's a difference between being an armchair Muslim exorcist, for example, versus an actual someone who's actually done it.
I've seen some things, and there are people in the Muslim world who do this kind of thing full time. And there are some who've come and settled in the West as well, but for the most part, this is something very hard to find in the Western world. Mm-hmm. And the people who really, really are deeply educated and trained in these arcane disciplines live in different parts of the Muslim world. Right. You find very extraordinary practitioners in India and Pakistan, Bangladesh. You find in the Arab world. I'm told that there's quite a lot of this in quite a lot of expertise to be found in this in Morocco. I don't know, I've never been to that part of the world. But in India and Pakistan, it's very interesting because Islam has been there for a very long time. And there has been a lot of esoteric dialogue, for want of a better phrase or term, between Muslims and Hindus who are involved in these things. There is Hindu magic, Hindu sorcery. There are so there is a lot of this stuff there. And when you go in India, you can see a lot of very strange things. In Persian, the Indian subcontinent or India is called Kishvar Haftadu Millat, which means the land of the 72 religions or the 72 sects. So there's this idea in the Islamic world, right, that all religions have split into all these sects, and Muslim religion will also split into 72 sects, and only one of them is saved. At least there's this idea. I seriously doubt that that's an authentic saying, but that is out there as a kind of thought, and 70 is a kind of symbolic number. So in Persian they refer to India as this land of multitudinous religions and beliefs, and it really is a fascinating place, and you find a lot of fascinating cross-fertilization that took place between Islamic and indigenous Indic religion, Vedic religion, Hindu in these realms. So, for example, in astrology, in the occult sciences, palm reading, alchemy, divinations of various kinds. So every time I go there, it's always interesting. And another interesting fact is there's a lot of stuff written, more accessible than you would find in Arabic. I find there's less written on these things in Arabic now and published. I think it's because maybe the rise of Salafism, and you do have Salafism in India as well, but A lot of these things are still available in the Urdu language. Again, mind you, they leave things out, but there's a lot of interesting literature there.
I noticed you mentioned one of the techniques on getting rid of a jinn presence. You either kill the jinn or you go to the lead, one of the head jinn, and ask its permission. You know, you say
you can kill if it's just one, but if the whole tribe has
right.
been brought into play, then you're in a very serious situation.
Absolutely, which is interesting because I think you see echoes of that in the Western grimoires, where there is a chief king, so to speak, and there are legions of demons underneath. And
yes, yeah.
you have to ask that you have to invoke the presence of that specific king or spirit to control those. Another thing you mentioned is the actual number, and I was thinking this is a Christian context, but you know, written around 70 AD, but a lot of the Gospels talk about how Jesus was a master exorcist. His ability to cast out demons, and one of the stories, you know, in the Christian context was there was a man possessed by demons, and Jesus said, you know, what is your name, or identify yourself, and they exactly, we are legion. It's not just one of us. There's many of us inside this person, you know.
And he cast them into a herd of swine.
Yes, and then the swine went off into the cliff, right into water, which talk about water being a constraining force against these things. It is fascinating.
Muslims, we believe in Jesus, but we believe in him as a prophet. Isa alayhi salam, there's a chapter named after Mary in the Quran. It's known as Surah Maryam. And, you know, we Muslims are just suspicious about these four Gospels. They're all in Greek. Jesus didn't speak Greek. It's Aramaic.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that everything in them is rejected. We have some of those stories which are in those Gospels, which are confirmed in our own sources. Then we have other stories which are in the Quran, which are not in the four Gospels, but are in some other apocryphal texts, and, you know, it's a whole field. I would think that any prophet or messenger from God, because of their holiness and absolutely sinless nature, and it's the belief of Muslims, particularly Shiite Muslims, that prophets and messengers of God are absolutely sinless. And so the devil, the shaitan, cannot have any influence on them. And so naturally they should be able to cast out demons, jinn, and what have you.
Professor, I think this is a fantastic place for our listeners to have a lot to think about. Before we go, let me ask you just to remind our listeners where they can find more information publicly about you, or if they want to check out your latest works, or anything you want to let them know about.
Yeah, the best now, I have a Facebook, which is just under my name, the title, Dr. Saiyad Ahmad, or I think it's also under Professor Sayyad Ahmad. And it's SAIYADAHMAD is how you spell my name. It's just Facebook / Dr. Sayyad Ahmad. Professor
Ahmad, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the podcast today. And we really hope to have you on again soon. Thank you very much.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you. This was a great discussion. I enjoyed myself very much.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Glitch Bottle Podcast and helping us uncork the uncommon this fine day or night, or wherever you happen to occupy space-time in your occult lairs, your summoning towers, or your cloistered libraries of the esoterically awesome. You can check out previous episodes and other magical Glitch Bottle news on YouTube, youtube.com/glitchbottle, and subscribe and download free episodes anytime on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and on Spreaker.com. Just search Glitch Bottle and enjoy. Also, please make sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at Glitch Bottle, all one word. Our intro music is the track Tornado by David Zeste. Our magical interest is fueled by sincerity, passion, amazing guests, and a copious amount of clinking coffee cups. Until next time, this is Alexander Eth reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.